We're going to get going. There's a lot of topics and a wide, deep series of engagements today around this important issue, so I want to welcome you. For those who don't know me, I'm Salt Lake County Mayor Jenny Wilson, and I was really excited to be asked to participate, especially because my office is just across the street, so thank you, Governor, for making this easy on me. And I am really thrilled to look at the audience today. Had a couple of conversations coming in and recognize the depth and breadth of the work that's being done related to aging in our community. And I appreciate the state's deliberate attempt to tackle some of the complex issues of our time, complex issues that are impacting our state and are certainly impacting my county. So with that, I want to welcome everyone today to today's symposium on aging. And we all know Utah's an incredibly great place to live. We heard it from our governor, excellent remarks, heartfelt remarks in your inauguration this week. And we know that what makes Utah so special is the caring nature of our community. And if you're here today, you're part of that caring fabric. You're people who step up every day to make things better, not just for your own families, but for our broader community. And as someone who lost an aging parent last year, I really do understand from a personal point of view the challenges that you're all dealing with if you work in this space. I recognize that often people who are aging face health challenges. Often, sadly, people, because of the shift in how their lives are running, face challenges with access to basic needs, including housing and food. And then we all know there's that emotional impact, isolation, the changing nature of relationships. I've witnessed that last year with my father's passing, is the rhythm just due to mobility challenges and just a changing way makes it difficult because relationships change. And of course, as we age, we lose more people. I felt that this past year. I had the opportunity to read a profile recently in the paper on the amazing citizens and residents of our state who sadly passed away. Some remarkable people who have set the landscape for the success that we enjoy today. So I just want to point out too, we're in this together. I appreciate the county being invited today because this is not a state drives solutions or a county drives solutions or a city drives solutions or a nonprofit partner. That Utah special sauce means we all roll up our sleeves, we identify barriers, we fight to fund them. Funding's always a challenge for anything that we're doing in the human services space, but we're in it together. So I want to recognize my team at Salt Lake County Aging Services. They're actually nationally recognized as a group that is working to make aging in place a reality. And there's a movement nationally in that space, and we are there at the table to see what we can do to make sure people can age in their own homes and their own communities. So last October, as a demonstration to the county's commitment to aging in place, our Office of Regional Development's annual Solutions Conference focused solely on that topic. Learning from national and local experts, we will continue to improve aging in place for all individuals. And Salt Lake County, the most populous county in the state, appreciates the ability to partner and brainstorm and work with the state and others to make sure that we're supporting our population aging in place with dignity. And our communities are fortunate to have people who provide caregiving to older loved ones, all of the volunteers in this space. In 2024, our Meals on Wheels team was so successful, and we had 86,000 hours of volunteer time to get those meals out. And the great thing about Meals on Wheels is it's not just dropping a meal, it's a wellness check, and we know that. So once again, I'm so appreciative, Governor, for your leadership in this space. All of the state team here working, I appreciate you as well. and also, again, everyone who has actively worked to make lives better for just one individual, but in doing so is supporting our broader community. Thank you as well. So with that, I have the opportunity to introduce the three leaders who will come forward for the first discussion. Amazing people, and those, again, people who are committed to this issue. So I'm going to start with Rob Allen, President and CEO of Intermountain Health. I'm sure you've all heard of it, Intermountain Health. We're so thrilled to have Rob in this critical role. Of course, Intermountain, a leading nonprofit health system in Utah with operations in multiple states and in the western U.S. In both 2023 and 24, Rob was listed by Modern Healthcare as one of the 100 most influential people in healthcare, and that's amazing. We know that Intermountain focuses on advancing rural health, telehealth, affordability, health for more urban areas like this county, and in continuous improvements for the company. Prior to beginning his role as president and CEO in November of 22, Rob served as the chief operating officer for 5 years, and he was named as one of the top 25 COOs by Modern Healthcare. Rob earned an MBA from Utah State University, a bachelor's degree in operations management from BYU, and he and his wife Becky have 3 children and 6 grandchildren. So with that, welcome. We're happy to hear from you today. I'd also like to welcome Dr. Julianne Holt-Lunstad of Brigham Young University. And Dr. Holt-Lunstad is a professor of psychology and neuroscience, and she is very involved with social connection and the Global Initiative on Loneliness and Connection for the U.S. Foundation. She is an internationally recognized scientific expert on individual and population health effects, biological mechanisms and strategies to mitigate risk and promote protection associated with social connection. Her research has been critical in recognizing social isolation and loneliness as risk factors for early mortality. She serves as a scientific advisor and regularly consults for organizations across sectors aimed at addressing this issue. You've seen her even providing congressional testimony, serving as a member of the National Academy of Science Consensus Committees, the UK's cross-departmental loneliness team, and advising the European Joint Research Council as a subject matter for the Gravity Project, Commit to Connect, National Clearinghouse of Interventions, and the CDC. So I appreciate her being here. We've seen her on many interview talk shows and other critical discussion groups throughout the nation. And then, of course, our governor. We're so happy to have him. And again, thank you for your remarks. They were so personal. And I appreciate the heart of this governor. We're all in this together. And to have someone who shares, I think, a journey, as we all do as family members, is so important. I'm appreciative of the work that the governor did last year as the chairman of the National Governors Association. That's such an honor. And it represents Utah so well to have our governor at the table with other governors advancing these important issues. We know of his long track record of public service, city council member. I didn't even know that, by the way, when I read your bio. I remembered the legislative piece, but council member, mayor, county commissioner, state legislator. Did you also dog catcher and mosquito abatement district? Did we get those in? Yes, yes, you get one title in Fairview, it's all. A 6th generation Utahn, we mentioned Fairview, Snow College, Utah State University, and Washington and Lee University School of Law. We're happy that you're a recovering attorney, by the way. And most of all, a family man. And with that, I would welcome the governor and the others to join for a great conversation. And again, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this, and my team appreciates it as well.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you. Mayor, thank you for those kind remarks. We're lucky to have you and appreciate you being here today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. It's great to see all of you. We've been looking forward to this for a long time, and we've done this now. This is our third year. I want to appreciate getting a little feedback there. Somebody turn that mic off for me. I think that mic's, with both of these on, we're getting a little feedback. Thank you, Sophia. We really wanted to focus this year, as we go into a legislative session starting next week, an opportunity for us to kind of, again, focus and on an issue that really matters. And this is something that matters to all of us. I will tell you, I'm glad we have some experts here, because I truly believe I'm aging more than everyone else in the state right now. The last 4 years have felt like 20, and I'm aging in dog years, and I'm hoping to get some help on that. But more importantly, we know there's a demographic shift happening in our country. The good news is that Utah's a little behind that demographic shift. We are the youngest state in the nation, but we are aging quickly. And we know that we have this large group of people, our baby boomers, who are starting to retire. And we know that as that demographic shift happens, that's going to cause some challenges and some opportunities for us as a state. And we have some experts here to talk about these pieces. So you've heard their bios. I'm going to jump right in. Julianne, let me start with you. You participated in a study that got a lot of attention. I know I read about it when it came out, and found evidence that lacking social connection is comparable to smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. So tell us more about that study and how and the research outcomes from that, please.
Yeah. First off, thank you for having me here today. And I think, in a way, the attention that you're bringing right now is, in a way, part of the impetus of that research. And I had been doing research on the importance of social connection for years. Now it's been over 2 decades. And certainly others had been doing research on this as well. And what I found over and over and over again was that people simply did not recognize just how important our connections are for our health. And so that was really the impetus for that research. And it wasn't just one study. We actually collected all of the data available worldwide. And we synthesized that data and combined it to find out, like, what is the overall effect? Because maybe it's not as big as I thought, right? Maybe I'm just biased here and think it's more important than it really is. And what I was blown away by is that we found that being socially connected was associated with a 50% increased odds of survival. And I realized this was huge, but I also realized, again, people aren't going to recognize, like, what does that mean? And so I benchmarked it relative to the most robust data available, and that was, what are the things that we take seriously for our health? And that includes things like smoking, excessive alcohol consumption, obesity, physical activity, all of these things, air pollution. And what I found was that the magnitude of that effect, so lacking connection, was comparable to all of these other things that we take incredibly seriously for our health. And what I realized is that we need to take, of course, our social connections just as seriously for our health. And my hope of that was to bring more recognition to just how important that is. And so I'm certainly grateful for you. I'm grateful for the many, this is now something that is widely recognized by the Office of the Surgeon General, the World Health Organization. And so we've come a long way, but we also are really still, in a way, behind as well, because even though that research was done several years ago now, I just collected data, nationally representative sample, and what we find is that people still see our social connections as something that is something that's relevant to our emotional well-being, but don't see it as relevant to our health or even our longevity. And so we still have a long way to go when it comes to awareness.
Okay, that's fascinating. Rob, thank you for joining us too. We're so excited to have you and lucky to have you. You've worked in places.
Across this country. And as the trends go, we're seeing more and more challenges for seniors on all.
How important this is, and then if you could again apply it to aging. That's why we're here. This social connection is important for all of us, regardless of our age, but especially as we start to get older.
Yeah. So I actually took a leave of absence from the university to work full-time with the Office of the Surgeon General. And so I was the lead scientific editor on that advisory, and continued to advise their office even on his latest parting prescription. And so I'm intimately know this well, and my time in working with that office really helped me recognize just how critical these issues are across every sector of society, and how literally everyone has a role in this. And so as I helped draft the national strategy for our health, we recognize that everyone plays a role. right? And so we didn't want, and we were intentional to not be overly prescriptive in those recommendations, but to recognize that individuals play a role. The education system plays a role. Healthcare system plays a role. The tech industry, businesses play a role. And government plays a role. And we all play a role. And so we need a whole of society approach. And that any one of those efforts can play a small piece, but together we can make huge differences. And so in working on this, I also realized that, as you mentioned, we're all aging, right? Aging doesn't start at 65. And so we can't start our efforts just at 65. And I should say, yet we do have varying needs across our life course. But if we don't start investing early, and we only find the problems at the end, right? Our efforts are going to be far more difficult. It's far more difficult to fix a problem after it's severe, right? It's far more expensive, and it's far less effective. And what we know is that investing early, prevention, promotion, can help us so that as we get to our later years in life, that we have a higher quality of life, that we increase that functionality, and that those years are high quality years.
Okay, thank you. That is a little better with the microphones. Rob, I want you to talk a little bit about trends that you've seen in our area, in the Mountain West, and then if you could talk about the work that Intermountain Health is doing to support Utah's aging population.
Yeah, so trends in Utah are better than the national trends. That's the good news. We know there's challenge. In fact, let me share a couple of statistics off of national to compare us to against that. But there was a study done at the end of 2024, and it looked at 10 countries, highly developed countries around the world, and how did they fare in health and wellness and those outcomes. The United States, out of those, had the shortest life expectancy of all 10 countries studied, had the highest avoidable death rate of all 10 countries studied, held the last place for health outcomes and affordability. And nationally, we're not getting out of our process of support throughout life's journey what, frankly, we want personally and what we should as a country want and expect. The good news is in Utah, we're in a better position in that process. You look at the trends here. I mentioned our life expectancy is 80.1 years compared to national life expectancy of 73. That's good news. Our cost of care in Utah is the lowest in the country. In Utah, the average cost per capita sits around $7,500 a year. If you're in New York City, it's over $14,000 a year, as you look at that. When you look at, Intermountain was recognized last year by Fortune. They have an AI tool. They're now looking at outcomes, data outcomes for hospitals and health systems across the country. Intermountain, they recognized 15 systems, and Intermountain was rated the #1 system. With those 15 aggregated together, what the study showed is if the rest of the country delivered medicine the way that these 15 systems delivered, including Intermountain Health, last year, the year prior, 200,000 Americans would not have died. Let that sink in. 200,000 Americans would not have died. There are better ways, and I'll tell you with Intermountain, we have to keep improving too. We don't have all the answers, but we can do better, and we even have models in our country that are showing that we can do better as we move forward. Trends in Utah, one of the concerning trends, now, by the way, I have to get this right too, Utah was named the healthiest state for retirees here recently in some studies, lowest poverty level in the country for our seniors, and had the highest social support structures in the country for our seniors, and those were contributing factors to this being a great place for seniors to age as we look forward. However, we do have a high suicide rate for our seniors. Now, the interior West is considered the suicide belt, and we have more suicides here. In the general population, I will tell you that we do not have more attempted suicide, but we have easy, ready access to firearms. And if a suicide attempt is with a firearm, it is almost always lethal, whereas other attempts at suicide are less than 10% lethal. So often an attempt at suicide is a cry for help, If you do it with a firearm, there's no chance for somebody to come and help. And so those are things we want to focus on with gun safety, to just help people stay safe in their journey and make sure that they, when moments of crisis come, they get the help that they need. Our seniors have that same challenge. Now, looking around us, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Nevada have higher senior suicide rates than Utah. But ours is still significantly higher than the national level. So that's a concerning trend we want to keep working on for sure. You mentioned what are we doing specifically in the state around these initiatives that we're launching, and we very much want, in fact, our mission at Intermountain is helping people live the healthiest lives possible. We want to be part of the journey with our communities where they want us to be. And every 3 years as a nonprofit, we're actually required to do a study with community agencies and look at what are the needs and identify the top priorities. And the current top priorities, the last cycle was 2022 for Intermountain, out of those work with our communities, was the number one item people wanted us to focus on was improved mental well-being. The second was improved chronic and avoidable health outcomes, helping people manage that journey when they have these chronic issues, and then really address and invest in social determinants of health. And the two biggest issues identified were food and housing insecurity needs for folks. And so that's work that we continue to focus on as we look. When we think of aging in place, which people want to stay in their homes. They want to stay where they're comfortable, where they know what it is, where they have their social structures. What can we do together as society? And at Intermountain, we're focused on a proactive care approach. How do we go upstream? How do we address these issues proactively, Julianne, as you were talking about, to be in that journey, address things before they become big issues, manage them. In that process, we actually want to avoid disease if we can, right? Our competition at Intermountain is disease. We are competing against disease, helping our community tackle it. If we can't avoid it, we want to cure it. It's easier to cure in the earlier stages than in the later stages. Breast cancer today, through traditional treatments, have a 96% cure rate if it's caught early. Colon cancer, we know, is largely curable if we catch it early. But if you wait very long and it starts to spread and expand, it gets to a point where it is no longer curable, and we lose too many lives from those things because we didn't get early detection and early intervention. And so we want to be a partner in that journey and go upstream and help people. In the side of how do we keep people financially stable, which is another big issue for seniors in our aging process, Intermountain Health as a nonprofit provides benefit back to the community. Using the state-required guidelines of calculating that benefit, last year Intermountain provided $1.3 billion of support across our community. There are a lot of factors in there. We provided charity care to over 345,000 people in the communities where we serve. And each of those are important in helping people, both having a low cost that I mentioned, half of New York in cost of care, and then being able to support the process so that people aren't bankrupted when they have a medical need. Those are important parts of our mission and our work going forward. And continuing to look at how we support this journey is something we want to do even better going forward, because it is our mission. And meeting people where they are. At different points in life, we have different desires. And there are points in life when I don't want anybody meddling in my business, right? There are points in life when I'd certainly like to find somebody who actually knows what I'm dealing with and be able to talk to about. So how do we meet people at those moments of time when we can really connect and be a help, right? And now we have to start thinking about, instead of taking care of a broad community all at once, how are we taking care of each individual? And so there's this dual approach. We have to understand the broad, the realities, we have to plan for that, but then we have to meet people where they are. And that's the journey we're on, and we believe that's critical to our aging population. And as I said, not too many years down the road, I'll be part of that population that we consider age, although we're always aging, as you said, Julianne. That's how I'm getting there, I guess, and along the way. But it's important that we do this, and we do this together. The other thing Intermountain is working on is how do we define more clearly our role? Intermountain Health cannot be everything for everybody. The state has a role, and Governor, thanks for the work you're doing in your administration. And local communities have roles, families have roles, cities and counties have roles. What are each of our roles so that we can work effectively and efficiently together? And that's an area we want to continue to work closely with all of you as partners and understand, so we can get more out of the efforts we're putting into this for those that rely on us.
Thank you, and thank you for the incredible partnership that we have, the great work you're doing in this state. Julianne, I'm fascinated by your work. You know this. We've talked many times. Going back to Dr. Putnam's book on Bowling Alone, where he was kind of the first to recognize this trend in American society where we were getting lonelier and lonelier, spending less time together, having fewer connections. You've talked about the damage that not just to our mental stability, but to our physical health as well. So I guess the question is, the important question, what can we do? What should we be doing? And I would bifurcate this question into two parts. As government, what should we be doing? Interventions, things that you've seen work. And then as individuals, all of us. Government can't make people go to church or go talk to their neighbors or do that kind of thing. That's not who we are. That's not our role. So can you help us, give us some recommendations on things you've seen that work and how we can be better at this?
Yeah. So first off, I want to just really emphasize that we have extremely robust evidence of not only its impact on earlier mortality, but it increases our risk for cardiovascular disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, many other chronic illnesses. It increases our risk of dementia. It even increases our susceptibility to viruses. But in addition to the health kinds of outcomes, it's associated when we lack connection and communities are less connected, it's also associated with greater crime and violence in our communities. And as you and I have also talked about, the impact that it can have on the divisions and polarization, and even my conversations with Department of Homeland Security around how it's related to radicalization and even terrorism and targeted violence. And so lacking connection is not only just important for our emotional well-being, it is critical for our personal health and well-being. It is critical for the health of our societies. And so it is very critical that we take action because, as you mentioned, we do have very good evidence that we are declining as a nation in our levels of social connection to a level that is quite concerning. And I think many of us might see this as related to the pandemic, but these trends started decades ago. Yes, the pandemic exacerbated these trends, but it didn't start there. But I think that there's a critical lesson in what we can do. And that is, first off, we realized during the pandemic that social connection is woven into every aspect of life, right? Because when we had to social distance, right, it impacted how we work, our education, travel, entertainment, and so much more, right? And so what that suggests is that there are opportunities to instead of disconnecting, right, that these are all socially relevant and these are opportunities for action. It's also a real clue to the fact that all of these agencies, private entities, individuals, we're able to quickly mobilize, right, to socially distance. Can we flip that? And take that and instead of socially distancing, socially connect, right? Okay, so how do we do that? One way is to just think about what are the actions we took and and are we still doing those things, right? Are we still doing everything remotely? Can we now, instead of ordering everything online, actually get out into our communities? Instead of just streaming all of our entertainment, can we actually engage in our communities, right? Can we do these things? But that's just a small step. We also know that there are all sorts of policies, whether those are government policies or the policies that occur in our workplaces and elsewhere. And just like we think about the implications for the economic implications of policies or the environmental implications of policies. I've published a piece that really argues that we need to think about the social implications. And so just like the World Health Organization and the CDC have adopted this health in all policies approach to things, we need to think about a social in all policy. Can we look at our existing policies? And in what ways are our existing policies, maybe they have benefits in some ways, right? But are they inadvertently becoming barriers to social connection. And what that might mean is that we revise those, find ways that we can still maintain the benefits of why they existed in the first place, but not have to have those barriers in existence. And so really evaluating our policies is a critical step. But I also want to tap into, I know you have your 3 Ps, people, places, prosperity. One of the things I forgot to mention that is we also note that social connection is critically important for our prosperity. And so there's opportunity to impact that. But getting back to those 3 Ps, people, places, and prosperity, our infrastructure. We need to think about how our communities are built, our homes, our workplaces. Are we building infrastructure that is creating barriers that make it harder for us to connect? So when it comes to anything, when it comes to our health, so for instance, my family, when I was on sabbatical, we lived in the Netherlands. And it was so easy to ride a bike everywhere. I loved it. I rode my bike, rain or shine, every single day. And I thought, I'm gonna come back to Utah and I'm gonna ride my bike every day. Well, I also live on a hill up in the mountains. And I was like, wow, this is not as easy. And it wasn't just the fact that the roads were really steep. It's that I didn't have the kinds of infrastructure, right? It made it harder to feel safe on my bike. And so we need the kinds of infrastructure that's going to make it easy for us to do the healthy thing, to do the right thing, right? And so we can invest in our infrastructure in ways that make it so it's easy to do these things that are healthy. The other that we have a lot of really good evidence on, and that I know that your office is really keen on, is the importance of service. And we have very good evidence that providing help to others, volunteering, serving, that it, of course, not only helps the individual that you're serving, but in some evidence suggests that it may have an even bigger benefit on the person who's actually serving. And so it can, and in some of my own data, we show that it reduces loneliness, it reduces conflict in neighborhoods. These approaches can be really critically important for the well-being of individuals and our communities, and is an incredible asset when it comes to aging. And so we think about our aging population, and if they're healthy, right, and have that health span, right, healthy longevity, this is an incredible growing asset that we have. And there's incredible opportunity because as our aging, with years comes wisdom, experience, and a willingness and wanting to pass on skills and learning that have come through a lifetime of experience that can benefit others. And so we really need to draw on that asset. But the way in which, so for instance, governments can get involved is we can make it easier for people to serve. And whether that is, and even earlier on, whether that might be policies around incentivizing businesses to allow time off to serve, for example. There are many ways in which we can facilitate these things that actually bring us more connection.
I love that. Thank you. I know we're out of time. I just again want to thank both of you for your wisdom today and for the great work you're doing in our state to help our aging population and all of our populations. I'll just leave you with one interesting thought when it comes to connection and how important that is. This past week we did have our inauguration, and there was a moment during the inauguration ceremony. We had a program printed that said that the Tabernacle Choir was going to be performing. And they were backstage behind the curtain, set up, waiting to perform. We knew they were there. I just assumed everyone knew they were there. It turns out not everyone knew they were there. When the curtain went up, there was an audible gasp of people like, oh my gosh, they're there. Now why am I telling you this story? When I asked people, like, well, what did you think was going to happen? They all said, well, we just assumed that they were somewhere else, that they were at the conference center, and that they were going to be singing remotely, and we were going to be streaming it live into the theater. And I thought, Isn't it interesting that our default now is that we won't have face-to-face connection? Our default now is that instead of going out to dinner, we will have dinner delivered to our homes. Instead of going to the store, we will have our groceries delivered to our homes. Instead of going shopping at the mall, we will have Amazon delivered to our homes. Instead of seeing our friends and neighbors, we'll connect with them on Facebook. We won't have those face-to-face connections. I'm just telling you, we gotta stop that. And if going out to dinner, going over and visiting your elderly neighbor is like cutting 15 smokes a day out of your life, you should definitely do that, all right? Thank you for making us healthier and better, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure to meet you.
Oh, okay.
Is that okay?
Oh, thanks. Thank you.
Representative Brooks in the middle. He's one of the chairs of our natural
In the
resource.
blue or red
In the
tie?
middle. Oh, with the red tie. The one
Okay.
second to the left.
Yeah.
So I was sitting next to him and she was
Okay.
Okay, well, I think we'll move on to our first panel. Thank you, Governor. We have an excellent group of experts here today that is going to dive into the first of our WISE acronym, the Aging with Wealth and Retaining Wealth. So let me introduce myself. I'm Casey Cameron. I'm the Executive Director of Workforce Services, and I have the honor of serving in the Cox-Henderson administration, and certainly the opportunity to serve many of our aging citizens in Utah. And so this is an important topic for me to be here today to be a part of this discussion. With us today on our panel, we have Senator Wayne Harper. He is the President Pro Tem of the Utah Senate, and he's currently the President of the National Conference of State Legislators, and also is the Director of Economic and Community Development for Taylorsville City. So welcome, Senator Harper. Thank you for being here. Representative Walt Brooks is also here, and he's the Vice Chair of the House Appropriations Committee. He has represented our great city of St. George, where we have many aging Utahns living, in the House for 8 years. And he's also a small business owner, so thank you so much for being here and coming up from St. George. And then also a former representative and well-known economist for Zions Bank, Robert Spenlove, is here, and he's just run over from the Taxpayers Association, so also doing double duty today. Thank you for coming. He monitors and reports on economic indicators and public policy developments for the bank, and also I think you're known, Robert, for all of your insightful and thoughtful approaches that make it understandable for us to digest the economic trends. So thank you for being here. And then lastly, Mallory, our representative here, Director of Demographic Research for the State Data Center with Kem Gardner Policy Institute. She's also serving on some national institutes and is very well versed in the State Data Center Steering Committee, as well as the American Community Survey Data Users Group. So welcome to our panelists. We're excited to get in here and get started. They have lots of information. We do have some slides today, and so we will be offering some visuals for you to take a look at. But let's dive in since we're short on time a little bit here, and we're going to start with Mallory. One of the things that the governor mentioned was that we are seeing a shift in demographic trends here in Utah. And so talk to us a little bit about those demographic trends and how does that compare with the rest of the country when it comes to aging?
Yeah. Okay, you can hear me. So turns out we are aging. Surprise, but also not surprise. As Dr. Holt-Lundstadt mentioned, we've had 65 years to know that people are going to be 65 this year. So fortunately, it's one of those things you can plan for. And Christina, if you want to do the first slide. So this is using our long-term planning projection work that we do at the Gardner Institute, and we do look at the age detail. And you can see, we think that that 65-year-old population is going to continue to grow as we move forward. And I know we're thinking about the here and now, but I think also we're always thinking about that future look at the Gardner Institute. And if you want to go to the next slide, part of that is because we know people are going to age, right? Like, obviously, COVID is that was a big unexpected hit that changed a little bit. But typically, you can plan on living, a life. And so we have our baby boomer section in that yellow box, but you can see Utah is the red line and the US is the gray line. And you can see in the US, we might have a little bit of a lull because Gen X broadly was a smaller generational group, and then millennials kind of bump back up. In Utah, we do our own thing. We love being original. And so you can see we're just going to keep seeing that aging population increase into the future pretty steadily. And so I think it's something that we need to think about. Compared to the US, we have 12% of our population over 65 right now. Nationally, it's like 17%. Recent projections from the Congressional Budget Office put more deaths than births in 2030. So something to think about, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. But we have we're still the youngest state in the nation. Like, we love being number one, so we're still the youngest state, but we're trending like the US.
Great, thank you. And I think this next slide shows that we're still the youngest state in the nation. So any insight into what this slide is showing us, Mallory?
Yeah, so, and sorry, the Great Lake borders get a little funny, but you can see different parts of the US are aging differently, right? The Northeast, kind of the Rust Belt areas, are a lot older than us. Out west, we're young. Texas, we're young. And so we've got some different dynamics going on. I didn't include it here, but if we zoomed into the state and looked at the different counties, we have some of these dynamics going on already. Our rural areas and our smaller population counties are a lot older than our urban core. So if we look at Paiute County or something like that, median age is 41 compared to around 31 in Salt Lake County. So we've got some pretty different dynamics. Utah County and Cache County, a lot younger than everybody. So every county is going to experience this differently. And so I think that's something to keep in mind as well.
Great, thank you. So as we look at these demographic trends, and I want to go to the next slide here, we're seeing a significant shift in our dependency ratio. Explain this to us, and why is it important to understand these trends as we're talking about aging?
Yeah, so the dependency ratio is basically working age people to non-working age people. So we have youth and retirement age shown on this chart, with retirement in gray. And similarly to that increase in just overall 65 and over share, you can see a shift kind of in that balance of the dependency ratio with more older adults rather than the younger adults that we've been pretty used to, and it's been pretty set in who we are as Utahns. This gets impacted by a lot of different things, right? We're a state right now that's attracting a lot of young adults for jobs and educational opportunities, and we think in our projection work that that's going to continue into the future. That helps maintain this balance. But if people don't want to move here anymore, then this balance could shift as well. So something to think about is, I feel like young adults are going to kind of be the hot commodity in part of this aging planning as well, of trying to think of how services are funded, who can help, provide services if needed, when you have that larger share that's going to be dependent in the older age groups.
Great. Very insightful. Thank you, Mallory. I want to shift over and build upon some of these demographic trends as we look at the economy with you, Robert. Talk to us a little bit about income for Utah seniors. So we understand the demographics, why this is important, how things are shifting, some of the challenges we're grappling with those demographics. But how is income impacted for Utah seniors by inflation?
Well, thanks, Casey. And I just want to thank you for doing this and thank the governor for putting this together. I'm really excited to sit on this panel because they're all friends of mine, and I've actually had two of their jobs. So 25 years ago, I was the state demographer, and Mallory's, so I love her stuff. I'm always geeking out about her data. And then I just gave my office to Representative Brooks, who took over as the executive appropriations vice chair. Senator Harper, I will never even try to have you, but we've worked together for a long time. So one of the struggles that that older people have is, especially if you're retired, you've got more of a fixed income. So one of the dynamics that we've seen over the last several years has been this shock of inflation, and not just the inflation, but these kind of permanent price increases. And so you can really see that here. What we're looking at is the blue line is the rate of inflation, and the red line is the change in wages. So as long as wage growth is higher than price growth, we can deal with it. But you see in that period right after the pandemic, right around 2022, we started to see price growth much higher than wage growth. Now, one way to look at it, you say, okay, well, the price growth has slowed. Wage growth is now above price growth, so we should be fine now. But if we go to the next slide, you see how those two compare, where the net effect of those price increases is higher than the net effect of those wage increases. So even with wage growth higher now, we still haven't caught up with those price increases. And so if you're on a fixed income, it's even more stressful trying to adjust to a world where prices are permanently 22% higher than they were 4 years ago. And then that inflation adds to those price pressures moving forward.
Absolutely interesting. I think one of the things that we talked about, Robert, that I think would be interesting for our participants here and certainly people in attendance, as we talk about inflation, explain a little bit more about what those numbers are telling us. I think sometimes we think of inflation, we hear it's going down. You're talking about prices. What's the difference?
Yeah, and so if we go to the next one, you see that this is, so the Federal Reserve Bank has done a lot of research in this area. And, you know, they look at the challenges that people are facing, and especially just over the last 10 years. If you look on the, so it's on the far left, inflation went from being, 8% of people seeing it as a real struggle to now it's a third. A third of people see inflation as being a real struggle. And then look at the next one over. Basic living expenses are one of the real challenges. And so you see how if you're having trouble meeting these basic living expenses, it puts your entire life under higher strain. And so that's what a lot of people are facing now. Another one of the big trends that we're seeing, if we go to the next slide, our country has gone through a transition over the last 40 years. So you look back to 1975, the way people funded their retirement was through defined benefit plans. So what we've got defined benefit and we've got defined contribution. Defined benefit is Social Security, or it's a pension, or it's an annuity. A defined contribution is more like a 401k. And so we had this kind of certainty of defined benefit plans, and now you see that overwhelmingly the way we're funding our retirement is through these defined contributions. So what does that mean? It means we're shifting the responsibility away from the employer or away from the government to these individuals to be able to manage their own assets into retirement. So if you're shifting that responsibility, then people need to be planning ahead and thinking far ahead about how to do that. But then if we go to the next slide, there's the Government Accounting Office. What they've found is we're not planning ahead. We're not saving enough. So I just want to focus on the middle income. So if you look on the graph on the left, 51%, around 51% of households have some retirement, which means the other 49% do not have any money saved for retirement. Of those 51%, the median amount that middle income has saved is $81,000. If you take that, so in finance we talk about a 4% rule. You can safely take out 4% of your retirement funds every year to live on in retirement. So if you take that kind of 4% rule and go to the one on the right, that $81,000 gives you $400 a month in retirement. I don't know anyone that can, pay all their bills with $400 a month, but not a lot of people can. You really need somewhere close to about 25 times your expected spending when you retire. Or you need about 8 times your income at retirement. So if you're making $100,000, you need to have about $2 million saved if you want to retire at the same standard of living. If you want to reduce that a little bit, then you can get away with only having $1 million saved. But what do people have? They have between $100,000 and $250,000. And so if we go to the next slide, people realize that they're not well prepared. And if you ask people, when we survey people, the question is, to what extent do you think America is facing a retirement crisis? Between 62 and 70% of people feel like we're facing a retirement crisis. And how concerned are you that you won't be able to achieve financially secure retirement? Over 50% of people are concerned that they won't be able to have that security in retirement. So there's a lot of things that we need to be talking about. That's why I'm so glad that the governor put this together. There's not one silver bullet to solve this problem. But we've got to be talking about this now. With an aging population, we've got to be talking about how to better prepare people to be managing themselves in retirement, and how do we return as many of those resources back to people.
Wow, $1 million. Yeah. Okay, well, let that kind of sink in. Let that kind of sink in, and everybody now is checking their bank accounts. I could see it when you said that. Okay, one thing that we talked about a little bit, Robert, is just the challenges and the uncertainty as we retire with money, and what happens with things like interest rates and other economic pressures. Talk a little bit about that as we're talking about not having enough money to retire, not planning to the extent, or maybe Americans not feeling like they're going to be able to have enough money. What adds to that in terms of those elements of uncertainty?
Yeah, great question. We've always got uncertainty. However, we think that there's more certainty than there really is. And that's, we think we have that certainty until we get a shock. And you can see the effect of those shocks. I mean, our most recent shock, of course, was the pandemic, right? We thought we were doing fine, and then we get slammed by this pandemic. Before that, it was the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. We thought the housing market was fine until we found out that it wasn't. And so what's happening now, we're still being impacted by that big shock of the pandemic and some of the distortions in the economy that were caused by that. We want to think that it's over, but there's still a much higher level of uncertainty today. We're seeing that just with interest rates. I hear this all the time. People say, well, I hear in the news that the Federal Reserve is cutting rates, but I'm seeing rates going up. And that's that disconnect between what the Fed is doing with short-term interest rates and what the market is doing with long-term interest rates. And the market is starting to build in this expectation of more uncertainty. Also, you lump onto that uncertainty with the federal government, the higher budget deficit, the higher debt, and frankly, uncertainty with Social Security. We're now about 10 years away from Social Security being insolvent. Now, being insolvent doesn't mean it goes away. But if they don't fix this problem in the next 10 years, if we get to that point of insolvency, they're going to have to cut Social Security benefits across the board by about 20%. And so Congress needs to address this. They need to solve it. But if they keep pushing the can down the, push the can down the road? Yeah. Kick the can down the road. There we go. They keep kicking the can. It gets harder and harder the longer you wait to do this.
Very insightful, thank you. Well, since we can't control Congress, and probably hope that changes here quickly, and some of those issues get addressed, we're going to look at what we do have control over here in the state of Utah. So our next set of experts here, we're going to go over to Representative Brooks, and you have some ideas to address some of this challenge in terms of retaining wealth as our Utah population ages. Tell us what you've been working on over the past couple of years, and then we can jump into what's on the docket for this year.
Great. Thank you for letting me be here today, and thank you for being here. It's a pleasure, Governor, putting this on. We have been trying to get rid of Social Security as long as I can remember. I remember my dad talking about it, my grandpa talking about why are we having taxes on Social Security. But some of the graphs that we've both seen today tell us why. One is we have lots of kids. That's why we are the youngest state. We have more kids on average per family than other states. How do we fund schooling? It's through income tax and property tax, but 2/3 of our state is controlled by the federal government, so we can't tax that property. So income tax and Social Security together is income. So when you take away Social Security and don't tax it, you're taking out of the education bucket. And so it was a really hard thing to do, and it was really, really expensive. How do you cut out $200+ million out of a budget when that budget piece goes to education? But if you saw another graph that Robert had, it showed that incomes are rising. We've done a great job in the state, for our economy is doing really well, which means that we're receiving more income tax. Now there's room to breathe. And so since I've been in 8 years, we've been working on this. Representative Westwood, he's no longer with us. Well, I should say it that way. He's not in the legislature. He's still alive. Okay, he's in Cedar City. He pushed and pushed and pushed, and we couldn't get anywhere with it because all the different approaches we tried, even if we just took a chunk, that means everybody got $2. It didn't sell very well, especially for how expensive it was. So several of us started looking at this at a different approach and saying, well, how do we tax based on income? And why don't we go backwards a little bit? Well, if you can see in this graph, we don't tax people who are in poverty on any income tax. So we said, let's start moving that adjusted gross income, or basically your income minus your deductions, that gets taxed. How can we move that threshold up in chunks we can afford and get through? And so you can see in 2020, we moved that level up to $32,000. So if you made, you and your wife or spouse, less than $32,000, you didn't pay any Social Security tax. And then we're able to move it up to $50,000, and then up to $62,000, and last year we got up to $74,000. So if you're making less than $74,000 a year, there's no income tax. And that was a way that we could incrementally move this ball forward that was affordable, that we could handle it, and it was often pieces of the other big tax cuts. You know, in the last 4 years, was it $1.3 billion that we cut out of taxes? This was a portion of that as it moved through. Senator Harper has been a big part of this, Senator Ipsen. We've had many representatives, Kay Christopherson, and a few others that really put a lot of effort into this. And this year, there's several of us have bills open, and our goal is to get rid of it. And how do we best get rid of it? Well, as my dad would say, a good deal is not a good deal if you can't afford it. Because so what can we afford? What can we get through? I'm very, very grateful, Governor, to you, to putting the sunshine on this, that this is the year. This is the year to get it through. And so now we're getting down to the nitty gritty. What can we put towards this? How can we get, because we want to do a tax cut. So how much can we get through? Can we get this all the way and be done with it? Or can we make it, phase it this year and next year and be done with it? What is it that we can try to do? And so that's the approach. We just changed our paradigm of how we look at this problem. And we've been able to make some progress over the last several years to get more and more people. This big number that you see in between there, that 204,000, that's how many Utah citizens don't pay tax on Social Security because they're underneath that threshold. So this is the year. We're working really hard on it, and got to give a lot of thanks to our governor for putting the sunshine on this.
Excellent. Yes, and as we saw, Governor, in your budget release, the governor recommended, I think, removing it in totality, which would help, I think, another 150,000 Utahns. So adding that to the 204,000 would be a great relief as we're looking for opportunities to add more wealth for our aging Utahns. So let's go over to Senator Harper there. Add to that in terms of your experience with working on removing the Social Security tax and your thoughts on your bill for this year.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. There's a lot of things going on, and I can't remember all the figures, so I got my cheat sheet right here. If you go back to 2007, 2008, we had tax brackets, graduated income tax rates, things like that. We changed that as a legislature, made a policy call. We wanted to have a flat income tax, a single rate at 7%. With the intent that as our economy grew and became more robust, as my green coat says here, the taxpayers can keep more of their own green, healthy money, okay? We've been able to do that successfully over a number of years since 2008 as we've done that. We're now at a 4.55% income tax rate for both corporate and individuals, okay? We have heard from a lot of constituents. I mean, calls I used to get were, hey, I'm a retired military person. How come I have to pay income tax on my military retirement income? Well, we ran a bill, and it was only going to be able to take half off, and then we'll come back on later. We realized the fact of the legislature, it's better to bite the bullet and take it all off and take that off the table. So a couple years ago, we successfully ran the bill to exempt military retirement income from state income tax. The calls that I'm getting now are, what about my Social Security and what about my property tax because I'm on a fixed income? And those calls come from young families saying, I'm a young family, I'm struggling. How do I afford to pay the property tax, which keeps going up every year? So the proposal that we're doing this year, and I want to cover two things. First of all is Representative Brooks and I are both working on the Social Security retirement income tax removal. He's got a slightly different way of doing it. The bill that I ran through interim takes it all completely off, and I appreciate the partnership with the executive branch on this. If you take a look at going through and raising that $74,000 up to $100,000 of exemption, you're helping about another 100,000 people. If you go through and take it up and full removal, it's about another 52,000 above that 100,000. So there's a chunk of people who are still need to be helped and we need to address. So my goal, and I think our goal is to do it. Representative Brooks has a couple creative solutions that we may have to implement, but the goal is to do that. Secondly is a thing that I'm proposing this year on property tax is to go through and modify the circuit breaker. Right now, the circuit breaker ends at about 38,000. Okay, if your income is less than 38,000, then you're eligible for anywhere between about an $1,800 and a $250 relief on your property tax. If this bill goes through, I would go through and create an additional bracket. The highest one would have a credit amount up to $2,000, and anybody making under $46,000 a year in income would have a $250 credit. So I'm adding another bracket. Now, with the budget that's out there this year, and it's not as robust, with the priorities to go through and do the Social Security retirement income tax, this may not happen. But it's something we need to keep on the table. So my goal and our goal up here is to make sure that people have the income in order to take care of themselves during the retirement and not rely on governmental programs if they can. So that's kind of what we're working on, and that's the proposals that I'm doing. And I don't know if you want to do questions now or what's your plan?
Well, I'm going to ask you some more questions. How's that?
Okay.
So talk to us a little bit about what Utahns can expect as this legislation moves forward. What does that look like in terms of money back to their pockets, and how have people responded to these other income brackets that have received, some of those benefits of previous legislation?
Yeah. Some people, depending on their lifestyles and that, don't see a whole lot, but I can tell you this, when everybody benefits from an income tax rate cut, but as we're taking a look at that growing amount of people who are moving from the workforce into retirement, we need to make sure that they have their pocketbooks covered and protected as much as possible. And that's really what I'm driving at. The figures that I've got here, average taxpayer, I'm still waiting for those figures to come back, so I don't have all the details. I do know for the retired, it will be very, very important. And something that Robert Spendlove said hit me. There's only 10 years left of solvency in Social Security retirement. Maybe I need to retire now so I can enjoy a little bit of it.
Yeah, we're all relooking at those retirement dates, aren't we? Let's go back to you, Robert. One of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about, we're talking about some policy solutions and how government can get involved, and certainly those tax breaks are going to be phenomenal for our aging population. But what can we do as family members? We talked a lot in the first discussion with the governor that these social connections and being a part of our family members as they age are super important. But what can we do? What can institutions do and families do to help with estate planning so that our aging population can secure wealth?
Yeah, great question. And like I said, there are not easy solutions, but these are opportunities. We need to be educating people. Everyone, one of the things that we've been working on for a long time, and I hope the legislature will keep working on this, is financial literacy. It's so important for people to be financially literate, all the way from young kids, all the way up to middle age and retirement. If we are shifting these responsibilities to individuals, then we need to give them the tools and the understanding to be able to make these decisions. It's very important to be planning out ahead. I think it's essential to be talking to a trusted financial advisor about your retirement plans. If you've got that pension, then you're probably good. But if you don't have enough pension to cover 80% of your current earnings, then you need to be figuring out a way to make up for that. And I think it should be a family discussion. You need to be having these discussions with your spouse, with your children, with your siblings about how are we going to make these plans moving forward and how are we going to make sure that we are prepared. And then also, just the nature of how we are living is going to change. With, just like Mallory said, when we've got a higher proportion of our population that is dependent. I mean, that's why we call it a dependency ratio. It's a more dependent population, and we've got to be kind of changing our paradigm to say we all depend on each other, and we need to acknowledge that and be prepared for that.
Great. Talk to us a little bit more as well, Robert, about housing and medical costs and how this is impacting our need for particularly long-term care and other of those uncertainty costs that come up as we're aging.
Yeah, those are both really interesting. Those are some of the areas that we're seeing some big changes, especially with the inflation and price increases. Now, you have to realize that the reason prices go up is because we continue to either want the same amount of that good or service, or we want more. And as we age, we want more health care. And so we collectively as a society want a higher level of health care. We want better health services. And so we're willing to devote more of our personal resources and more of our government resources to that. And so we've seen increases in healthcare costs. And some of that is because of supply chain or labor force, but it also is because we want that higher quality of life. So we should acknowledge that. And it is something that we need to watch out for and be careful about, but it is also the result of a thriving population that's living longer and living healthier. With housing, there's kind of a combination. We're seeing this problem nationwide where we've got this deficiency of housing units. Nationwide, it's about 5 million fewer housing units than households. In Utah, Mallory, what is it, 30,000? Isn't that the number? It's about 30,000. And so what that just means is we're not able to build enough housing to meet the demand of our household growth. And another thing, Governor's been working on this. He's been, talking to builders, talking to developers, talking to banks and trying to figure out this solution. But they're really tough to do. And then as we're kind of coming out of this distortion of the pandemic, we all kind of need to be changing our expectations. We can't all expect to live in a 4,000 square foot house on a quarter acre with a 3-car garage and expect it to cost, $200,000. We've got to start saying, okay, maybe we're going to get the carport. Maybe we're going to have, linoleum floors. Maybe we're not going to have that huge lawn in the back. And these are tough changes. When you've got a shock, you kind of hope that things will go back to the way they were before, and then over time, we kind of move from the short term into the long term, and that's what we're adjusting to right now, is saying, okay, what's the long term? How do we adjust to this, and how do we change our society to adjust to these changes?
Great, thank you so much. Well, we are wrapping up our time here. Wanted to give some opportunity for Representative Brooks. Certainly you represent an area of the state where you are seeing this firsthand all the time with a huge aging population that takes advantage of that warm weather. So what are you hearing from your constituents and hoping to see change in terms of the area that you represent in the legislature?
Well, St. George is a wonderful place. I affectionately call it heaven's waiting room. So, because all my neighbors have much more wisdom on me. But what they are struggling. They are struggling with what they're doing with their properties increasing. In just the last 4 years, properties have tripled in downtown St. George. And so I've had to work with some people to try to figure out how to access the circuit breakers. And one of them, it saved their home. So, because St. George was built where you lived in the front and the back was your farm, kind of thing. So these really deep lots, and that dirt is getting really expensive. And so it's nice that we're having some of these policies move forward. And one of them is just the cash in hand. Groceries, eggs, everything's going up. And I had a buddy once that I was complaining because I'm like, it's only $10. He goes, well, it's at the first of the month or at the end of the month. $10 is a lot more at the end of the month than at the first of the month. And the seniors are starting to feel that. So hopefully some of these things that we're pushing forward this year, appreciate again the executive branch's support on this, to be able to keep some of that cash in hand so that $10 at the end of the month can get what they need.
Great. Well, we're really excited about what work is being done in the legislative branch, and certainly the executive branch, our leadership there, in terms of spotlighting this. We have a soft spot for our seniors in Utah. I just lost some of my grandparents this last couple of months, and one was 96 and a veteran and served in the Navy, and got right down to the end of life, and certainly had experienced the benefits of a pension and wealth and being able to save. But we know that that's changing and shifting, and that we have a baby boomer generation coming up, and certainly want to see them age in a healthy and safe way. And so we appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. Thank you to our panelists for being here, the experts. I feel like we've been fully educated, and we can take this information back to our institutions and our employment, as well as our families. I think the call to action I'm hearing today is certainly to be aware. From Robert, it's to save, and then to be active as we look at policy solutions in the upcoming legislative session that starts next week. So please join me in thanking our panelists for taking time to be here today. Thank you so much.
We are going to start the next panel in just a minute. Stretch your legs, grab a snack and a drink, and we will start here in just a minute or so.
What you eat is the dog whistle.
Yeah, exactly.
Good to see our
You are awesome. Thank you for doing that. All right, we're going to get started on our next panel to keep us going. Thank you all so much. Terrific. Thank you all again for being here today. This is an exciting event, and we are so appreciative to the governor and his staff who have done so much to make this happen. It's an important topic. My name is Nels Holmgren. I'm the director of the Division of Aging and Adult Services in the Utah Department of Health and Human Services. So this is a topic that we're excited to talk about all the time, and we're excited so many other people are also willing to talk about it, and we appreciate the interest that's here today. We have a terrific panel in the governor's WISE initiative. We've got health, independence, security, and engagement. We are going to be talking about the I in that WISE acronym for independence. And we're going to be, our panelists are focusing on aging in place and how we can help our seniors as they age to remain at home as independent as possible, living the lives that they want to live. We feel, as you talk to all of us, we want to be at home, as has already been mentioned, where we have familiarity, where our family and social networks are in place around us. And so helping people have the tools and the meeting the needs to allow them to do that is a high priority for us. We have 4 very distinguished panelists who all represent different focus areas in that effort. First of all, we have Matt Hansen, who is the Executive Director of the Home Health and Hospice Association of Utah, where he has served since October of 2019. He has master's and doctorate degrees from University of Utah, and really has focused on helping seniors through the provider organizations out there across our state to be able to focus on living the lives they want to live in their own homes. And he has a passion for addressing social determinants of health and supporting individuals in their home and community. Next, we have Valerie Greer, who is an assistant professor and the director of graduate studies at the School of Architecture at the University of Utah. She is an architect and her research focuses on aging and design with a focus on aging in place and age-friendly communities. Valerie co-created a symposium on age-friendly communities in 2022 and just recently published a co-edited book in 2024 focusing on neighborhoods, campuses, and health systems as significant places to promote healthy aging through the design of physical and social environments. And we are excited to have her as well. Next, we have Dr. Beth Fouth. She is a professor of human development and family studies at Utah State University, and she's the director of the state-funded Alzheimer's Disease and Dementia Research Center. She serves on Utah's Commission on Aging, the Alzheimer's Disease and Related Dementias Coordinating Council, and the board of the Utah chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. And her research focuses on supporting family caregivers of people with dementia. And she recently authored a chapter on aging in place, so this is very relevant and very fresh on her mind right now. And finally, Paul Leggett is the director of the Salt Lake County Agency on Aging and Adult Services, the largest of our 12 area agencies on aging that are based on county governments around the state. The Salt Lake Division of Aging is the largest of these and serves over 18,000 older adults each year. And Paul is committed to ensuring that older Utahns have the opportunity to age in the right place, and has a wide background in other social services related fields as well. So we are very excited to have them with us and to hear their thoughts on aging in place and how we can support our seniors in this endeavor. And so we'd like to start by just inviting our panelists to each take a moment and give their thoughts on the greatest current need that they see with regard to supporting seniors and aging in place, and what barriers may exist to our seniors being able to function at home as chosen. So Matt, if we can start with you and share your thoughts, and we can kind of go down the row here.
Thank you, Nels. Would you like the short answer or the longer answer? Short
We
answer
want
is
the
always
right
the same,
answer,
probably
Matt,
for every group
so-
that's been up here, and that's funding. So that's the short answer. What I can do is use an illustration. One of the programs that the state uses, and it's an HCBS waiver, which stands for Home and Community-Based Services waiver through the Medicaid program. There is one of those waivers is called New Choices, which gives individuals the opportunity to be able to receive care at home or an assisted living program when they're stable enough to be able to transition from an acute care setting, so from a hospital or from a nursing home. The cost for receiving that care at home at the end of 2023 was $1,600 per individual approximately. To receive that care in assisted living per month, excuse me, to receive that care in an assisted living facility, it was $2,600 per month. And to receive that care in a skilled nursing facility, it was approximately $5,500 per month. Now, if somebody suffers a fall and a hip fracture and requires a hip replacement, the average cost nationally is approximately $40,000. So the investment, I think one thing is, much as we love our representatives from the GOP, from the Democrats, from independents, et cetera, one thing that I noticed has been missing from priorities from the leading party this year is affordable aging. It's the biggest part of our budget, Medicaid is, right? And it is in many, many states as well, and rightly so. But we have another one of our priorities this year, water conservation, which I think should be a priority and something that we need to look at absolutely, right, for the days ahead of us. If we don't do something about affordable and investing in affordable aging, the drought for healthcare is coming as well.
Great. Valerie?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to come and to be here and for hosting this. You know, from my perspective, I'm an architect, and I look at places. And when we think about the zip code paradigm, which is that our zip code has a more likely chance of telling us how long we're going to live than our DNA code. But that's something that's created, and that ranges quite a bit, even if we look inside of the Salt Lake Valley, where we can see really big, like significant differences in life expectancy. And we're in an unprecedented time. This is one of the greatest achievements of human history, that we're living longer and healthier than we ever have. But we also have a problem, which is social as well as physical, in terms of the places. We know that places impact how we age and how we thrive. And so when we're looking around, and this is a great room to talk about it because it's beautiful here, but places impact how we feel, and health accumulates and it aggregates over time. And so when we're looking around and we think about, for those of you who know the 880 paradigm, the idea is that a city or a place that's great for an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old will share some of the same characteristics. And when we think about that and how it impacts our social connection and how it impacts our health, we begin to maybe analyze our own neighborhoods and our campuses and our health systems and our workplaces. And we think about sort of what are some of the barriers that are present, but we're not always cognizant of. So that's kind of a short answer, but I would kind of also say that we're in a position of responsibility, but also resources, where to the governor's point of the choir coming out, you know, we actually have a lot more in front of us than I think we sometimes acknowledge, in terms of looking at aging as really social capital. There is so much hidden capital inside of our aging population, and we look at neighborhoods and the way design impacts intergenerational connections. We actually have a lot of sort of hidden wealth, I might argue. And so those are some of the challenges and kind of what I look at from the perspective as an architect.
Thank you. Beth?
Yeah, thanks. I was actually thinking I was going to be nervous sitting up here, but I keep seeing friends out in the audience. So you guys are making me feel like really comfortable and happy. Yeah, you know, I'm coming at this from a perspective of somebody who primarily studies dementia and caregiving. And so for me, I think one of the things I'd like people to kind of understand is that it's cognitive impairment that often is what prevents people from being able to age in place in the way that they want. So if they want to stay at home, they want to be independent, they want to live alone, those things are wonderful, right? Independent adults can make those decisions. But it's really that tipping point of when a person has cognitive impairment that, you know, modifying the home becomes irrelevant. It's like, you know, the person needs more. And so I think the conversation for me is, if we really want to promote aging in place for older people, we have to start having more open communication about cognitive impairment. Being comfortable with getting tested, having providers going beyond just a subjective, do you have any memory impairment? Nope. Okay, good, let's keep going, right? That's not an effective screener for cognitive impairment for older people. And so I think there's, for me, a lot of the conversation comes around having people become more comfortable with having discussions, getting tested, talking to family. When you have some kind of cognitive impairment, it may advance into Alzheimer's and it might not. And the good thing about getting tested early is that's the opportunity for you to make plans, make financial plans, make housing plans, talk to family members about your wishes. There's also really important social things like take the trip, right? If you have been thinking about doing a houseboat down in Lake Powell, do it. If you've got that diagnosis or sort of maybe a pending diagnosis. So there's a lot about quality of life, about sort of optimizing the stages of aging where people may have cognitive impairment or they may be at the end of life. A lot of that happens in the earlier stages of cognitive impairment where you can make decisions and have conversations. So that would be the first thing I would say is we cannot promote aging in place unless we start having effective conversations about talking about testing and planning with cognitive impairment. And then secondly, very related to that is people with cognitive impairment often can live at home, and that might be their preference. We really have to start talking about supporting family members and caregivers in this role. A lot of people do this role willingly, but they're doing it somewhat alone. They're feeling like there are not resources. There are a lot of resources out there, but again, it comes down to having conversations and saying, if you are gonna have somebody at home that you're caring for with dementia or some kind of neuro impairment, we're gonna have conversations about your health and your well-being and your support and respite for you and way to support you in your journey. So again, for me, I think it would just be, it's not a minor part of an aging in place conversation. It's actually a pretty critical part of this conversation, sort of both from the diagnosis side, but also from supporting families.
Terrific. Thank you, Paul.
Great. Well, I'm glad I get to go last because I get to pick up on everything you said. But I want to first say thank you for inviting me to be here today, and thank you, Governor, for putting on this event. And I think now that's kind of the million or several $1 million question, right? Is what is the biggest barrier to older adults staying in their homes? And from the perspective of a service provider, as Nell said, we are one of 12 area agencies on aging across the state. Those are the agencies that are in the community. They know the older adults. They're the ones providing caregiver support. They're the ones doing Meals on Wheels. A lot of those services that we think about when we think about how do we age in place are provided through the Area Agency on Aging Network. And every year, we put together a plan. And that plan talks about how do we meet the needs of our most needy older adults in our communities. And I'll tell you that the three things that always come to the forefront in those plans are nutrition, transportation, and housing. I don't think those are a surprise to any of us, right? Those are the things that we know all of us, but specifically older adults, are dealing with. And nutrition is the one that I am most scared of because we have some big challenges coming our way when it comes to nutrition. The Meals on Wheels program, I think everyone is familiar with that program. And as was mentioned earlier, it's not just about providing a meal, it's that social connection. It's that someone's checking in on someone every day. There's eyes on, making sure that older adult is doing well. But I think as we've all seen over the past few years, we go to do our grocery shopping, the cost of food has gone up significantly. The cost of gas has gone up. When you add those things onto an increased demand for those programs, Meals on Wheels is at a really critical point. And I really want to recognize Governor Cox for including additional nutrition funding in his budget to support these programs across the state. We have a wait list for Meals on Wheels in many counties. That's new. That's not something that is part of this program. Meals on Wheels is such a fundamental part of how people stay in their homes. I think one of the things that, as we look to the future, we know that more and more, as was mentioned earlier, people are living longer, their needs are more acute. This is an area that's going to see significant growth. Without consistent and ongoing support to that infrastructure, we are not going to it's going to be a really critical mass point for so many older adults, being the difference between staying in their home and going into long-term care or going into skilled nursing. As was mentioned, we want to keep older adults in their homes, and access to food is one of the primary things that we can do to do that. Secondarily, I think one of the biggest barriers, as was mentioned by Beth, is just having the conversation about what it means to get older. I think we're all a little reticent to talk about getting older. I know that sometimes I think maybe I should be more proud of getting old, given my role, but then that inherent part of us is like, there's a little bit of stigma to getting old. We want to demystify what it means to get older. There's opportunity, there's vibrancy in getting older, and there are challenges as well. And with that, it is important for us all to remember sometimes, I think, that there is a notion, that there's an attempt that we all have is to think, well, people are 60 and older, this is how they're defined. These are their needs, this is exactly what we need to do. But those individual characteristics, everything that we experienced before that time, our culture, our history, our trauma, our positivity, our life experience, doesn't change when we turn 60. So remembering the individuality of aging and making sure programs allow for choice. I think sometimes in our work with adult protective services, we'll often get calls from people saying, my neighbor needs to be on Meals on Wheels. They may very well need to be on Meals on Wheels, but they get the choice. They get the choice as to whether they're on Meals on Wheels. They get the choice of whether they want in-home services. They get the choice as to how they age. And I think part of the conversation about demystifying aging is that it's our goal. If we're not getting older, we're not around. The alternative is not great. Like, the goal is to get older, but we all want to do that in a way that feels empowering, that feels that we have a voice, and that feels that we have support. So I'm so happy that we get to have conversations like this, because I think that's where our community conversations need to start. It's wonderful that we're talking about getting older, but I know when I even talk to and I'm sure she'll love that I'm sharing this story, talk to my mother-in-law about going to a senior center. She lives alone, she's a widow. And I'm like, you should go to the senior center. They have all of these wonderful classes. She's like, I'm not old enough. And I'm like, wow, I'm doing something wrong if I can't convince a family member to attend one of our senior centers. But that's the experience that we see so often. People aren't old enough, and we have this wonderful service mentality in Utah where people are like, no, I don't need that service, give it to somebody else. And what happens is services then get delayed and people call in crisis. And when people call in crisis, the interventions that we have, medical transportation, in-home services, Meals on Wheels, caregiver support, it's too late. If we can get people talking about what it means to get older, our ability to age in place will be increased significantly.
Thank you. Beth, you mentioned a focus on supporting caregivers. What are the ways that we can best help seniors to keep those informal networks, neighbors, family, religious affiliations? How can we help keep those networks functioning well, and how can we inform people, especially as Paul has mentioned, sometimes the older adults that we're working with are less willing to reach out for help, and often family caregivers may be more so. How can we get the resources and information to them as well?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So, there's a lot of different layers of how we could figure out the answer to that question. One is informing caregivers in our state that we actually do have free services, free education and support for them. So many times people come up to me and they say, we just need, we need more. It's like, well, we have some. So I think for me, a lot of it is, where is that point of contact that a caregiver is interfacing with a care provider or a neighbor or somebody that can be the person that says, oh, did you know we have area agencies on aging, we have support groups, we have the Alzheimer's Association, we have dementia care clinics throughout the state that cover telehealth. I mean, we have these resources available, but it's really, there's definitely a disconnect with letting people know that they're around. And so I think part of it is the kind of using a train the trainer model. Who are the key pivotal people in certain rural counties or in certain communities that are the person that a caregiver might go to if they're asking questions, needing support, or just mentioning what's going on? Maybe that's a religious leader. It might be somebody within the area agency on aging. It might just be the person that everybody knows in town. And really trying to identify that, those people can be kind of part of a bigger network of researchers, providers, and policymakers to say, oh no, we have some of this stuff. Let's get you connected. This doesn't have to happen by yourself. You don't have to go it alone. You don't have to be struggling. Or if you do struggle, let's get you connected with resources to help you in that process. So I think sort of from a strategic standpoint, it's building upon the networks we already have and connecting those networks with the knowledge that they need to provide for people that they're already interfacing with on a daily basis. And then I think too, a lot of it is, this becomes kind of more personal, but when you hear about somebody caring for an older adult or really caring for anyone, having a listening ear and just saying, it doesn't have to be okay, we can talk about it, and being really, purposeful in the questions that you ask. So, there's a lot more that we can do instead of, just saying, can I bring you a casserole? I mean, maybe that is what they want, but maybe there's something else that they might benefit from, transportation or sitting with their loved one so that they can get a break. I think that there's kind of, again, this comes down to like training us, all of us, to be more comfortable with these conversations. I think kind of what Paul was talking about, recognizing that somebody's doing something that they want to do as a caregiver. They love being a family member that's providing support, but asking questions about how specifically, we can support them in this process instead of just sort of, saying, oh, that must be hard. There's lots of different things. Caregivers are really bad about often, asking for help, but if you are specific in saying, can I do this for you? Can I bring this to you? Can I sit with your loved one? They'll often be more willing to accept that kind of support.
Matt, on that line, obviously you work with a network of paid providers for the most part, but how can paid providers leverage those informal supports and those family supports and vice versa?
All right, thank you, Nils. A couple things. First of all, I'd like to add to Beth's answer first, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
And for everyone, we have, if you may not be aware, we have more than 450,000 non-paid family caregivers in the state of Utah now. It's incredible, right? So many of them, I think one of the biggest challenges is, first of all, helping them to recognize that they're not alone. They are part of a community. There is a community for them. Many of us are of pioneer stock. We're independent. We do it. It's what we do. We take care of people, right? We're independent. And many people, they'll feel that they're alone. My mom took care of both of her parents, one of her mother-in-law, for years, not knowing what resources were available to her. So number one, I think it's helping people to recognize I am a family caregiver and there is support for me. Secondly, it's creating, and there are some wonderful groups, there are so many groups in the state that are doing things for family caregivers now. We're aware of this situation, we're doing things. I'm going to use the Utah Commission on Aging, Rob Entz, as one example, trying to become a repository of resources. And then we need to train those who are aware or in a position to be able to help these individuals, as Beth indicated, to direct them to the right place. Because trying to do it on your own, you're all over the place trying to find all these different resources, and many times you're just not aware of them. You throw your hands up in the air. And those caregivers need support themselves. Now, with regards to how they can work together and the paid caregivers, again, education. We need to educate discharge planners, social workers, anybody who's in a position within the community, within our healthcare systems, about the resources as well so that they can make them available. They really are that point. And back to Paul's point as well, it needs to be person-centered care. We talk about that in healthcare all the time, right? None of us like to have things done to us, right? We want to be part of that decision, part of that conversation. But far too often, we're just pushing things. We're making decisions for others. We're pushing things on them rather than asking, like Beth indicated, and then respecting those wishes.
Awesome. Paul, did you have a follow-up on caregiving?
Yeah, and as you were both talking, it just made me think of some interesting information that I believe was shared by the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute at the recent Office of Regional Development Conference that Salt Lake County held, is that 30% of the next generation of older adults, so it's 55 to 63, are childless. That's a big shift for our family caregiver network. As was mentioned, we have so many amazing family caregivers, and we run a caregiver support program and hear these amazing stories, and people are doing it because that's what you do. That's what you do. You take care of a loved one, and you do what needs to be done. But when we don't have a generation that is there to take care of older adults, what happens? Who picks up that slack? And I think that's what this conversation is, right? Because we have the area agencies on aging. We can pick up the slack. We know those things, but it's about how do we make that? How do we make those connections? Because, I mean, one of my favorite events to go to every year is the Centenarians Lunch that is hosted. And it's such a, if you've never been, see if you can find a centenarian to take, because it's
I
one of
know
my-
a guy who can get you in if you want to see.
It's one of my favorite events to go to, and so many of the people that are there are with caregivers. And to see the love that exists between caregiver and care recipient is really inspiring, but it's also really hard. Being a caregiver, I think either most of us in the room have either directly been a caregiver or have witnessed someone that we love be a caregiver, and seeing the stress, the emotion, the role the burden that is, and I say burden in a way that is encased with love. People do it because they love someone, but we know many cases where caregivers are passing away before the person they're providing care to. That's heartbreaking. That's a real challenge for so many families. And how do we support those caregivers? And it sometimes is as simple as just saying, it's okay. It's okay to say that it's hard. Let us help you navigate some of these things. Can we start bringing meals in? Can we start bringing some care in? What can we do, and how our community is going to respond? And I love the governor's focus on service, because I think that focus on service is going to be the key to supporting older adults staying in their homes when the next generation comes of age and the family caregiver network isn't as robust as it has been.
Terrific. Valerie, we've already heard today a little bit about the housing shortage that exists in the United States and the country, and this is obviously a major topic and one that policymakers are very much focusing on. I'd like to get your thoughts with regard to older adults and housing, and the idea that in addition to housing, there's a need for community and designing communities that work well, as you said, not just for the 80-year-olds, but also for the 8-year-olds and everyone in between. What opportunities exist, and your thoughts on the current housing situation and how to make our communities better prepared to meet seniors' needs and allow them to retain independence?
Thanks, Paul. Well, I think density is a really important thing. In the last panel, we talked about changing expectations and thinking about sort of what it is that is sustainable. And I think that with housing, and as we look at accessory dwelling units and sort of models for increasing density and promoting social connection amongst neighbors, that's a really important opportunity. It ties back also to transportation, ties back to climate and resources, right, in terms of being able to walk to a grocery store or walk to pick up a book at the library, right? And that's a really important kind of hidden aspect of wealth, right? That it allows people to be in place and to access resources and each other. When the pandemic hit, we did this study on aging in place and what it meant to be thriving in place. And we asked older adults in Salt Lake City to do a photo voice study, which is when you take pictures and so it's inductive research. We didn't have a hypothesis. But one of the things that we found, which we were amazed at, was that more than half of the pictures that came back were not of house and home. We were expecting to see things around adapting your garage to be your gym since you're at home or things like that. But people were out, and it was really important to think about defining aging as in place as being much more than a house and a home, but really sort of your network of think about where you travel, how you get there, how do you find a front door, and why do you want to keep going back to that place? And so I think that that's one thing that we've definitely learned from the pandemic, and that we've seen be connected to not just the question of a house, but sort of where is the house and what's it connected to. The other piece too that I think, I just spent a week in Hong Kong, which is one of my favorite places to study aging. And it's amazing to see how our infrastructure and our transportation supports sort of aging in place. If you're over 65, the cost to ride on a bus, which is not a public bus or like a city bus, but 20-person bus, is 25 cents. And so you see people out and walking, and it's really amazing to think about some of the things that we can do. It does take funding, and it takes a lot of it, but the return on it, I think, is immeasurable, especially for our next generation. And so that's one thing I wanted to also just build on when we're thinking about perceptions of aging. We know from research that negative perceptions on aging will reduce the number of years of your life. And so when we live in in sort of a market in a world where ageism is maybe one of the most invisible forms of isms. And we have the opportunity for our next generation and for us and our generation to revise that story, to retell the story of aging, and to associate positivity and look for what the benefits are, and as we are all aging. So when we're thinking too, back to the 8-year-old and housing, my daughter recently told me, she's like, so you're gonna rebuild the garage and you can live there. I will live in our house with my family and you can care for my kids. And I'm like, good planning.
It's a good plan.
But yeah, very good plan. But sort of by being able to imagine that world, right? And to be able to think about how we move between silos, because oftentimes we are sort of thinking about the home is just sort of the confines of our bathroom, bedroom, kitchen, but we have the opportunity to work outside of those silos, and it's really important for all of our collective well-being.
Terrific. Beth, we've obviously talked a lot about staying at home, and obviously that's people's preferences. However, we also know that facility-based care is a reality, and there are a lot of providers and a lot of different options out there when people need more support than can be effectively and cost-effectively served in their homes. With regard to that facility-based care, what principles of these home and community-based services can be applied to maintain as much of that home connection as possible?
Yeah, I think Valerie teed me up for this really well. You think of the concept or the definition of place, and place is a geographic space, right? It's like the borders of wherever you're talking about. But if you think about home, you think about the dwelling and the building, but you're really thinking probably about memories, items that are important to you, and most importantly, relationships. So relational aspects of place are kind of driving the emotional attachment to place. It's the people that have been in your living room. It's your kids. It's your memories of holidays and what your traditions are in your home. I mean, that's really, really often why people are so connected to their home. Besides the fact that, the house is set up the way they want it and the knives are in the drawer exactly the way they want it and all those other things that are actually, important too to feeling comfortable in your space. It's familiar, it's the way you want it. So, a lot of people in this room don't need to hear this, but some of you might, so I'm just gonna say it. Don't ever tell your parents, I will never put you in a nursing home. Just don't do it, please. It just leads to problems down the road because you can't predict the future and you don't know the situation where for their safety, for their well-being, that may be a necessity. And you can get quality care in residential long-term care. So how do we replicate aging in place principles? It's about, building comfort within the space. It's about relationships. It's having social engagement. There's some really interesting stuff. I love that this whole program has been bookended by social engagement and, social isolation, right? So we've got the armchair discussion and then our next panel are talking about the importance of social engagement. And so if you can build a sense of place in residential long-term care, there has to be components of relationship building. There has to be social engagement. And that might be, scheduled FaceTime with old neighbors, right? People that you want to connect with. And also the willingness of staff within those facilities to establish social conversations. So we did a research study a while ago at Utah State where we did observations in a memory care unit. And we looked at just observing the positive behaviors of the people living with dementia. And without any interaction from the staff, there was, about 36% of our observations, we were doing minute-on-the-minute observations, about 36% of the time you could see some kind of positive engagement, smiling, leaning in, participating in an activity. And when you had even the slightest social engagement from the staff, good morning, I love your sweater, what a beautiful day, we saw that go up to 84%. It was just these tiny moments of understanding that, it is my job when I engage with somebody to be a part of building that social relationship and social connection, even if it's fleeting, even if it's somebody who has memory impairment, advanced memory impairment, those things are important. So in that way, if you kind of think about what are the aspects of your home that you love, and just think a lot of those could be brought into residential long-term care. Those feelings, those emotions, relationships, familiarity. The most important thing, and this was brought up earlier, is choice. So when people move into residential long-term care, they give up a lot of freedom. They don't have the ability to choose, when they're having their meal or what their meal is, and so on, their activities. And so rebuilding in choice into their everyday experience is vital for them to feel like this is their home. They have a right to choose, aspects of their meal, or, include people in meal planning if you can, include people in activity planning. So there's lots of different ways about, eating, bathing, dressing, caring, lots of different ways we can incorporate choice. It's sometimes an inefficient way to provide care for the care provider in residential long-term care, but it's necessary. We just have to be able to maintain autonomy for people living in their own space.
Awesome. Matt, a question. We've heard a lot about housing. We've talked about waters, inflation, some of these big topics that are with us. To some degree, post-pandemic, we're more aware of them. Workforce and how that affects your organizations that you work with, and what are things that you see that may be possible options for alleviating the workforce crunch that we're experiencing now?
That's a great question. Thank you. And first of all, thank you to the governor and the governor's office. During the pandemic, we learned so much about staffing, about workforce, and the groups, the task forces that were assembled, and through DHHS leadership as well. Several different things. Number one, we need to move upstream, right? Particularly for healthcare. So, the focus has always been on once somebody is in higher education, we need to get into the high schools more. And many high schools and school districts are doing that, creating practicum opportunities, letting them know the classes, the design, and how they're designed, that there are opportunities in healthcare. We talked about untapped resources and untapped wealth. I think one of the greatest resources that we have are the family caregivers. We need to work more closely with them. Maybe we need to talk about policy about how family caregivers can get paid for some of the care that they provide at home. Many of them have to leave their jobs, their full-time employment, right? So they're not contributing in that way to the state, to the economy, through taxes, et cetera, and they've had to leave jobs in order to be able to care for a loved one. Even when there are programs in place, if they're underfunded, the staffing is incredible. Paul could tell us all about the waiting lists, right? It's incredible how people who have been approved have to sit on these waiting lists for months and years at times in order to get the services. So first of all, we need to, again, fund programs that are in place. Secondly, I think work with the family caregivers and find a way that we can tap into that. And then again, there's also the immigration policies, right? That we need to have smart immigration policies that support people in a safe way to be able to help to care and be a part of the workforce also.
Awesome. Paul, anything from the government program side of workforce and meeting the demand that's out there right now?
Yeah, I think to Matt's point, the wait lists are really disheartening. These are people that are eligible for services, that need the services, and due to lack of resources are sitting on wait lists. And I mean resources kind of across the board from the provider level, even at our staffing level. Not a lot of people go into social work to work with older adults. It's not particularly exciting from the outside perspective. So how do we put value on the workforce that supports older adults? And we talk a lot about the kind of the workforce, our direct care providers, our paid caregivers. They're often really quite low paid. And here we are with our expectations of knowing the impact that these folks can have on older adults, their quality of life, their day-to-day living. We need to elevate this entire workforce to a point where we're looking at these in the same way that we look at maybe this isn't the best association, but doctors, nurses, teachers, these are often seen as unskilled jobs that are not jobs that people stay in, but they do stay. We need to talk about what this workforce is and the impact that they have. I think the other piece that on the workforce side is that we know what we need to do. There aren't really any secrets about how we can support these folks. We know what we need to do. We just need to invest in that infrastructure to do it. We need to invest in agencies that are providing new choice waiver services or aging waiver services, because at the end of the day, bills have to be paid. We recently heard of a case management provider here in Salt Lake County, Utah County, and Davis County that's no longer going to be supporting the new choice waiver program through case management. There's now 300 individuals that need to find a new case management agent to receive those services. Well, the challenge that we have there is that the reimbursement rates for case management don't really cover the cost of running the program. So without additional funding going in, these programs are not tenable. These programs will go, I say program, these services will go away. And these are the services that make a huge difference between people staying in their homes and premature admission. And I want to kind of clarify, when we talk about aging in place, it doesn't necessarily mean aging in someone's home. To Beth's point, the place is really just a geographical place. It's what everything else that, because some people, skilled nursing is the appropriate thing. And I think one of the things that I recently learned about that's happening in Washington State that I think is really exciting is they have just begun a non-optional payroll deduction for long-term care insurance for every resident in Washington State. The only way to opt out is by having private long-term care insurance. That benefit gives every single person in that state access to $36,000 of long-term care or assisted living support. Now, the big piece that's important in that is a kind of a case management access to resources. Because what we don't want to see is somebody retires, immediately uses their $36,000, then goes on to live another 20 years, and is really struggling to get by. What we want to do is braid those services. We want to support family caregivers to a point where maybe being at home isn't the right option. Then somebody can go into skilled nursing, use this $36,000, and still retain that choice, still retain that dignity. Now, that's a long journey that Washington State have been on to get to that point, but I think these are the conversations that we need to be having at a community and policy level, and because the way that we're doing things now works if you have, well, to some degree works if you have resources. The clients that we see that don't have long-term care, that they're not prepared for retirement. I don't know if any of you have visited a Medicaid bed in a long-term care facility. It's a motivator to not do it. I mean, it is shared rooms with a curtain separating your private space. So many of our older adults are ending up in those situations, not because they want to, but because they have to. And this conversation today, I think, is a time to change that trajectory for so many Utahns. When we all think about how we want to get older, none of us imagine that will be our future. And I think every single person that's in one of those beds, none of them imagined it was their future either. So investing and elevating this work from workforce to services to family caregivers is such an important part of how we shift what is happening today to where we want to be for future generations of Utahns.
Thank you. Maybe in our last couple of minutes, if we could, here. He'll keep talking if you clap for him. So maybe in our last couple of minutes, maybe we can start with Matt. Just any final thoughts on aging in place and just maybe a wrap-up statement on it.
Thank you. I say first and foremost, we're going to end up taking care of these individuals one way or another, right? So I'd much rather take care of them where they want to be and have them be part of the conversation. We don't want them ending up on the streets, right? We don't want them ending up in a place where they don't want to be and passing away, especially spending their last days somewhere they don't want to be, surrounded by people they don't know. So we need to take that into consideration. There are ways that this can be done and save our state money. And that's the other thing, because we do have to be fiscally responsible. There are ways that it can be done and save the state money and still get the results that we're hoping for. The other component I said we didn't get to today would be technology and leveraging technology. There are a lot of things that can be done to keep people at home as well. There are a lot of organizations that are doing things. Intermountain Healthcare is doing wonderful things, and Hospital at Home and different things. Community nursing services that I see here, remote patient monitoring, and taking care of people and watching them so that we don't need to be present physically all the time, 24/7, but there are other ways that we can monitor and note if there's an issue going on or if there's been a change in status. So there are a lot of things that we can do, and I appreciate the opportunity just to have this conversation. Thank you, Governor, for your leadership.
Valerie?
Thank you. You know, I would invite us to think about age-friendly places as being an ecosystem. We have the ability to kind of look at neighborhoods and campuses and health systems and to really think about how places are drivers for change. But what we need above all of that is a connection. So we work in silos very often, and we all know this in this room, but so sort of how we move between those silos and how we think about the relationship between skilled nursing, Alzheimer's, being at home, memories, social support, like that's the hard stuff. That's the really, really hard stuff of synthesis. And it is a wicked problem, I think, that we're facing. But with that, I think there are so many dedicated people, and I look around in this room and see friends, and so I'm so glad to be working with you on this. But I would invite us to think about what the conversation is our children or our grandchildren will be having about this in 40 years, because it is shifting and it's changing, and the actions that we take and the way that we work with each other and communicate is going to have such an impact, not just on the architecture of our physical environment, but the architecture of how we age. And I would really invite us to think about that over the whole lifespan, because it doesn't sort of hit you at, I'm 49, it doesn't hit you at a certain age, but it is sort of the messages around aging, how we communicate that and the value that we associate with it. That I think really is impactful to think about how we can change that for the positive.
Thank you. Beth?
Yeah, I think I think one thing I'm excited about is conversations like this. So, I mean, for me, I love to talk. I'm a professor, obviously. I get paid to talk to people, tell them what they need to know. But I think a lot of it, like this room is a really great example of breaking down the silos that Valerie was talking about. You've got, researchers, you've got caregivers, people with lived experience, you've got, policy. I mean, we have so many things covered in this room, and everybody here is here because they're passionate about this experience and about what they do. So it's like we have, we are a really, really impressive state in being willing to talk to people outside of our own discipline about what's going on and what some of the solutions are. And this is not my opinion. I was at a conference in November, and it's a national conference, and Utah was called out as being an exceptional state at solving problems and working together. And it was all about how, Utah is an example of a state where this department works with this. And, we've got a coordinating council where actual caregivers are on that council helping to inform decisions and priorities. So I guess, from a positive standpoint, we have this network or infrastructure here. And so we got to move on. We have to talk like we're doing today. But when it comes to making solutions or kind of identifying efficiencies, ways we can do better, I think we have to maintain this sense of bring more than one discipline to the table to talk about that problem or to come up with that solution. Because there is there's when you cut here and it may impact this. And I think these shared discussions are where really kind of practical and helpful solutions can emerge. And so I would just say, let's continue what we're doing. Thank you, Governor, for this. This was an amazing experience because I think this is exactly what we need to move forward.
Paul, very last minute.
To add on to everything that's been said, I think one of the most important things that we need to do in wrapping up is listen to older adults, is to include older adults in these conversations. In my experience, a lot of people aren't shy in telling me what we can do differently, what we can do better, what they need. And that's a really important part of this, right? Like we can, as Beth said, we have a lot of disciplines, we have a lot of expertise. But the people that really know what they need to age in place are the older adults themselves. So remembering that voice when we're designing services, when we're making policy decisions, when we're looking at how do we support, because aging isn't just about older adults. Aging is an issue that impacts us all. And oftentimes we'll talk to other government entities and they'll be like, well, we don't really do anything for aging populations. Yes, you do. Every employer, every part of our society, there is a nuanced perspective that is specific to older adults. And when we're talking about what do we need to do next, it is that we need to be paying attention to older adults across the spectrum of our communities.
Thank you so much to our panel. We appreciate it. Paul teed up a point there at the very end about listening to our seniors, and the Department of Health and Human Services, as part of the Governor's WISE initiative, is going to be doing a series of listening sessions around the state this spring. We look forward to seeing people that are here today, but also seniors, community leaders, families, and caregivers. So we look forward to more information to come on that, and look forward to seeing you around the state. Last word, I have been told that lunch is ready. They're hoping that we can crack the whip and get people through this line in 15 minutes and back in to eat while we listen to our next panel. Thank you all.
Today, or this moment, over your lunch, we're going to talk about predatory practices, some of those unseemly things that actually can be really hard for us to talk about at times, and certainly can be hard for our seniors to talk about. So I'm thrilled to have members of our team from Department of Commerce here, as well as some of our partners. I'm going to introduce those in a moment. But wanted to make sure you all know that the Department of Commerce really has a key role in taking action against bad actors who undermine the public's trust in our state's commercial activities. In fact, our mission is strengthening trust in Utah's commercial activities, including those who commit fraud and scams, and particularly those who commit fraud and scams against our seniors. I wanted to just tell a quick story. So a very dear friend of mine who is an incredibly intelligent, very competent, very confident 65-year-old single woman, okay, we'll call her Sharon. She had a terrible experience. She was going online to find companionship, like many people do, and she was sort of amazed at this person that she met, seemed incredibly handsome and intelligent, shared her faith, was super interested in her, and many of her friends were sort of like, it kind of seems too good to be true. And sure enough, a few months into this sort of online chatting relationship, this man started to ask for money to fund different things. And fortunately, at that point, she started to maybe kind of think about what some of her friends had said to her. And her friends started to do some investigations. It turned out that this guy was not who she thought he was. He was a man in Nigeria running this scam. And he'd taken over the profile, the online profile of a man in New York who happened to be very handsome, as it turned out. So she actually got out of that before she had financial loss, fortunately. But she had significant harm to her sense of self, her pride, her confidence. And it was really, really hard and shameful. And that's one of the barriers that we face oftentimes in our enforcement agencies, our Division of Consumer Protection, our Division of Securities, who are represented here on this panel, is that sometimes people don't report these things, particularly our seniors, because it feels shameful, it feels embarrassing. So we're hoping to really combat that. So I'm here to announce that we are going to be taking a huge, we're going to be really initiating a huge outreach campaign directed at our seniors to help them help themselves, to inoculate themselves from these frauds and scams. Some of you might have seen our Scam-A-Lot campaign, sort of riffing off of Spam-A-Lot, if you know that. We've done a lot of that. We have our Nights of Scam-A-Lot. We're going to be introducing a new night that will be specifically targeting our senior population. And then we'll also be doing a lot more outreach via television segments, senior expos, senior centers, anywhere that we can find seniors, all to support this initiative that Governor Cox is leading to help our seniors, and in this case, help them to avoid fraud and scams. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panel. My communications director, Melanie Hall, who will be heading up this outreach initiative, will be moderating this panel. And again, we have representatives from our Division of Consumer Protection, our Katie Haas, our Division of Securities, Assistant Director Francois Grayson. We've got representatives from the AARP, whom are our partners, and from the AG's office. So with that, I'll bring Melanie up here. Thanks so much.
Good afternoon. We are very pleased to be here today and unfortunately lack no dearth of information about frauds and scams with our seniors and other vulnerable adults in particular, our focus for today. I just want to tell you briefly about our panel. We have Coy Acox, who is a special agent from the Attorney General's office. He works quite a bit with Medicaid, fraud and patient abuse, and that includes investigating and prosecuting neglect, abuse, and exploitation of vulnerable adults who are residing in assisted living and skilled nursing facilities. We are very pleased to have Coy with us today. We also have Francois Grayson, who is the Assistant Director of our Divisions of Securities. In her role, she does quite a bit of education to the public and to seniors in particular on investment law and fraud and what are some of the things to watch for. So we'll get to hear a little bit about that. Jay Hapala from AARP. He is the interim state director for the state of Utah at the moment. He is actually from Minnesota, so he came out a special for this event here today. And he just told me he does he's probably done about 1,500 of these. So I don't think we could have got someone with more expertise to speak about preventing predatory practices of our aging population. And then last but not least, we have Katie Haas. She is the director of our Utah Division of Consumer Protection, which, as you can imagine, gets to see a lot of bad activity related to frauds and scams, including those that are being perpetrated against seniors. Katie enforces about 25 state laws, believe it or not. And in particular, you'll probably hear about it today, but the Utah Consumer Sales Practices Act, which has to do with deceptive practices. And so without further ado, I want to welcome our panel and thank them for joining us today. Thank you. Just quickly, we don't have a slideshow, but I do want you to take note of the slide on the screens. There is a QR code that is a link to a document of resources that we may mention today. I want to make that available to all of you, and certainly I want this to be a living, dynamic document that we can add to, that we can pool resources to share as we go out and we do presentations and work with senior centers and other organizations that care for, advocate, or help our senior population. So our first question is going to be for Coy. What are some of the common predatory practices targeting seniors and vulnerable adults in Utah, and what legal recourse does the Attorney General's office have to offer victims?
Thank you for allowing me to be here, and I can't say it enough, as everyone else has, Governor Cox, for putting this on. It's a great platform, and I'm honored to be here. We are going to hear a lot about predatory practices, and including in the introduction of dating practices. Those, you hear about those often, and they are very real. However, I'm going to shift gears just a little bit and talk about what I see in my arena and shop. And unfortunately, we are seeing a lot of exploitation, and that has been, the perpetrators of that are persons of trust, more specifically family members. We're seeing a lot of folks that are going into assisted living facilities. They have their nest egg, they've got their trusts, they've got their set up, and at the time comes, they turn the through attorney of fact or a power of attorney over to a family member or another person of trust. And as they're paying for these assisted living facilities, which can be costly. I had my father in one in 2018. It was $7,300, and it was cash pay per month. And so, and then my mom, a couple of years later, was $5,800. So you see their savings and such going away pretty quickly. And you start seeing the family members who are over the money see the money dwindle. And we've all heard of inheritances, which pretty much in the shift of our society is a thing of the past. Representative Brooks talked about, the home in St. George and the farm behind. We took care of our family members, and family farms or family businesses or manufacturing companies were passed down to the family in a form of inheritance. So I think they see these things going away, so they use the money for themselves. And we're seeing a lot of cases. I mean, we're almost backlogged on a lot of cases of that. So I don't want to talk about this as doom and gloom, and I've got stories for days that I could tell you, but I'll spare you some of the very heartbreaking facts that go with that. The second part of that question, the legal resources and what do? We prosecute those aggressively. I see them as our most vulnerable, and we will go after those. Our team in the Medicaid Fraud and Patient Abuse Division is very specialized. We work as a task force with attorneys, investigators, forensic auditors, nurse analysts, and we all, when one case comes in, we have that whole team that's assigned to those cases. And so from start to finish, we have the legal support of the attorneys, we have the investigators, and we have a pretty tight case. There are many challenges with this. We used our victim services to help with them because, again, this is family members a lot of the times. So we do run into some challenges with this, but we are prosecuting these cases. We had found that sentencing was on some of these cases, was a little bit light. We were wanting to get some legislation to strengthen those, but our Sentencing Commission spared us the trouble in the matrix system, and we are now seeing prison time for those who meet the matrix of like $50,000 if they've taken them from them. So they are seeing prison time, which creates a sticky wicket because family members don't want their family members to go to prison. So there are many challenges. That is what we are seeing. And with the group and the panel, education and prevention is going to be key in these cases in the future.
Thank you. Next question is for Jay. How does AARP Utah work to educate and advocate for seniors against predatory practices, and what resources are available to help support them?
Sure, thanks, Melanie. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Governor and Lieutenant Governor, for having us here today. AARP is a big membership association of 38 million people across the country, about 250,000 here in Utah, and we work on all the issues that we've been discussing today, from social connections to financial security and caregiving, communities that support us as we age. We're favorable and supportive of the elimination of your income tax on Social Security benefits, so we'll be working with your lawmakers on that issue. And we have a very strong program on fraud prevention. When we ask AARP members about their top concerns and interests, among all issues, staying safe from identity theft and from fraud is at the top of that list. So we have invested our resources into providing education and also working on policies that prevent fraud. And in response to that, what we've set up is a nationwide call center that takes thousands of phone calls every single week from people. They don't have to be AARP members. They can be people of any age who are looking at their computer screen and not sure about whether to trust what they see. They're being targeted every single day. Think about it this way. Financial fraud is the most commonly attempted crime in Utah every single day, just like it is across the country. And we help people. So whether they're just trying to navigate through the scams that they see, or whether they've been victimized and lost money, we will help them stop that scam from taking place and make sure they don't lose any more money. We'll help them figure out where to report that fraud and that scam and to get help. And as a side effect of all of those phone calls and reports that we take, we get the up-to-date current trends, when people's phones are ringing with scams right now today, what are the scams that are targeting us, and then we educate the public. So whether that's through the media, whether it's with our volunteers like Grant, who's here today, we will meet with any audience anywhere and try to help people understand the latest trends, because our research doesn't have to be complicated, but it shows that when people are aware of specific scams, they're much less likely to lose any money and much less likely to even waste any time dealing with all these criminals who are targeting us here in Utah.
Thank you, Jay. Katie, what role does the Division of Consumer Protection play in preventing predatory practices and assisting victims? And then can you also just talk a little bit about red flags and what we would like our aging population to know?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you all for being here today and for having us. As Melanie mentioned, the Division of Consumer Protection, which is part of the Department of Commerce, oversees about 26 statutes, and most of them have to do with deceptive acts and practices, including the Consumer Sales Practices Act. And this can be everything from something as small as I walked onto the dealership of a car dealership lot and there was a misunderstanding and they promised me a price and it wasn't that price, to massive frauds and business opportunity type scams. And so we kind of see what I would call the kitchen sink of various types of frauds and deceptions come through our office. We have about 25 investigators who work full-time at helping consumers find some sort of restitution or working with businesses to get that restitution. And I will say that most of them have family members that at some point, particularly their parents, who have also fallen prey to some sort of scam and fraud. So they're incredibly sensitive to the shame that can sometimes follow a victim. And that's one of the things that con artists, and I'm gonna call them con artists, are really good at, is building that relationship of trust, building that relationship that Margaret referenced with her friend who spent months kind of reeling her in before she was prompted to give over money, helping eliminate some of those red flags, et cetera. And then when they do finally fall prey to the con, they feel very ashamed about that. And so we at the division talk a lot also about being wise, and I don't want to steal something from the governor, so I'm going to talk about being wiser. And so I'm going to add an R. So W is watch for red flags, and we talk about high-pressured sales tactics, whether it's the people on your doorstep selling you a product or somebody online that you're texting with, that high-pressure urgency, someone's in your bank account. I literally got that text today. Someone's in my bank account, apparently. Hopefully that's not true, but there were a lot of typos, speaking of red flags, in that. It wasn't good English, and I was like, that's probably not Chase Bank with all those typos. And so we talk about watching for those red flags. The I is to investigate. Say, just pause for a second and do some research about whatever somebody is prompting you to do at that time. S is set boundaries. I'm not from Utah, I'm from Massachusetts. We have no problem saying no in that state. Everyone here is so polite, and I love that everyone here is so polite, but that also means that people have a very hard time saying no, and we're very trusting here in the state of Utah, and I love that because it fuels our economy. But at the same time, telling our parents that it's okay to say no, it's okay to close the door to the person that's sitting on your doorstep, it's okay to hang up the phone, it's okay to not respond to that text. Setting those kind of boundaries in the beginning and having those types of conversations so they don't feel that guilt for maybe being what in their mind is rude. E is to examine the fine print. We talk a lot about auto-renew contracts and subscriptions, other types of things where people might not realize what they're signing up for, to again take some time, slow down the process, and really read. And now I'm gonna add R so that I'm different, wiser, and I'm gonna talk about that relationship. Unfortunately, the AG's office just mentioned, my friend here, about how at times those relationships of trust can be abused. On the other hand, I think it's so important that senior citizens have a relationship with a person that they feel comfortable calling and saying, hey, I'm about to go to this Bitcoin machine and transfer $10,000. Should I do that? No. And so it is really important that they know that it's safe to call, to say that their computer's frozen, to say that they've started this relationship with somebody that they didn't know online, and that we don't make them feel bad about having done something because they're lonely or sad or whatever it is. And so that trusted relationship, that friendship, is the person that they can call before they make a decision where they're transferring money is so important, particularly with our elderly population.
Thank you, Katie. Francois, how can seniors and other vulnerable adults protect their financial assets from predatory practices? And what are the steps they should take if they suspect that they've been scammed?
Thank you, Melanie. I always describe the Division of Securities. If Katie said that the Division of Consumer Protection sees the kitchen sink, we're very specific. We only look at investment fraud. So the Division of Securities, we license over 180,000 folks in the state of Utah. So this is anyone that you go to get any sort of financial advice, or if you need a broker to submit any of your trades. So there's a lot of things that you can do to try to protect yourself from investment fraud. One of the bigger things that you can do is have your financial institution place something called a trusted contact on your financial account. So what this person is not someone who can act on behalf of your account. It's not someone who can change any information on your account, can trade on your account. They can't get money on your account. This is solely a person that a financial institution will contact if they suspect suspicious activity on your account, or for some reason they're not able to contact you. So it's just an extra layer that you can put on your account for protection. And it's very easy to do. Some financial firms are different. You can either give them a call and they'll take a verbal confirmation and the information, or more likely than not, they'll actually have a form. There's a lot of other things that folks can do regardless of your demographics, and I tell every investor, including myself, check your investment, verify. Even if you know the person who's asking you for money for whatever the investment is, ask all the questions that you would of any stranger who's asking you for your money. Don't be afraid or nervous, to Katie's point, or too nice to ask the questions to protect your assets. And then, of course, you can submit a complaint with the division. We have several resources at our disposal, and so do other financial firms. For instance, Utah enacted a statute called the Protection of Vulnerable Adults Against Financial Exploitation. And what the statute does, it does a few things. It places an affirmative duty on financial firms to do a few things. They can submit a vulnerable adult report with the division, as well as with Adult Protective Services. And they also are able to slow down the process. Katie talked about this, slow down the process and think about the transaction. And they can also pause the transaction so that they can actually investigate to see if something's going on there. Of course, a person can submit a complaint with us, and if we do find any sort of investment fraud, we actually have enhancements in our statutes that if a person involved in the fraud, that's the complainant, is a vulnerable adult, and just for simplicity, we'll say that a vulnerable adult is considered a person who's 65 years or older for the purposes of our statute. We actually can place additional enhancements. And Coy can talk a little bit more about this perhaps from the AG's perspective. So we do have different resources at our disposal. I would say that the broader perspective that we would offer would be to say, don't be ashamed to report if something does happen, and then don't be embarrassed to ask the questions to prevent something from happening.
Thank you, Francois. I'm going to skip a question here, panel. But for Katie and Coy, what are some of the most significant challenges in preventing and prosecuting predatory practices against seniors? And how do you think we can address some of those? So what are some of the most significant challenges in preventing and prosecuting?
First of all, we're only as good as the information that we receive at the division. So making sure people know to report to us and to report quickly. The more time that goes by, the harder it is to gather the evidence that we need to bring a case. So it's super important, especially if you're that trusted person I just talked about, and a senior calls you, is to get that information to us. If the division is not, because I refer to us as the kitchen sink, which is not a great way to describe the division, but we are very good at figuring out where somebody should go if it's not us. So if it's a security, we're going to get you to securities. We're going to hold in the one Utah type spirit. We are going to make sure that we do a nice handoff for that individual to get them to the right place to report whatever it is that's happening to them. But if it is something that we can handle, the sooner the better. There is a program called Rat Back that if we get within 24 hours of a transaction, we can actually put a hold if we notify the federal agencies about this. It's rarely used because usually it's too late. Once the money is gone, particularly depending on how they're transferring that money, it is very difficult. In a world of digital currencies these days and digital exchanges, it's becoming more and more difficult for us to get that money back. Cash is also difficult. So when we find that someone's used a credit card, for example, much easier. If they've paid with a check and a wire transfer, sometimes we're able to do things there. But when people pay in Bitcoin or they pay in some sort of crypto, it is very difficult for us to get those funds back, depending on where they are. So that's one of our biggest challenges. The first, well, two really, with the way they're paying, and number one is just the lack of information if people don't report to us quickly. The other thing is just generally speaking, evidence. People aren't great at capturing the evidence of what's happened to them. So again, screenshots, phone records, those types of things. It's, in a digital world, it's harder for senior citizens, I think, sometimes to know how to grab, even to do a print screen or whatever to capture some of their conversations. But evidence is crucial to really prosecuting these cases.
Yeah, some of the challenges in when I was speaking of what I see the majority of is education of the family and letting them know that, you know, this stuff can happen. And, you know, the checks and balances in trying to figure out how to prevent this is very challenging to us. How do you tell a family member that you may be exploited by somebody you trust? I mean, they're not going to understand that until it happens. One of the challenges that we see in prosecution is they are victimized by their loved ones. And as I mentioned before, the sticky wicket, they don't want to see their family members get in trouble and go to prison or otherwise. So we have an unwilling victim in some cases that don't want to come forward. You know, some of the sad stories that I hear from them is they are now feel they're going to be isolated because their family members going to hate them and never talk to them again. I mean, that's tough when you are at that stage of your life and you are already feeling vulnerable in many ways, and now you're threatened with losing a family member, either by your cooperating with an investigation so they're never going to talk with you again. That's hard. And so those are extreme challenges for us. So another challenge too, I mean, one of the education processes is they don't have money, they're not going to get into a facility. Medicaid will not cover somebody who has assets that have been depleted under value. And that means that if they go back and do a look back and they see your account where there's funds that have been taken or drained out of the account, they'll deny. And it's been my experience is 100% of the time they deny. However, 100% of the time on appeal, they will do an urgent need for it and give them Medicaid. That's hitting the taxpayers' dollars with someone else's exploitation. So those are some of the challenges we run into. Hopefully I answered the question, and if you need more information, I'm happy to talk after.
This question is for Jay and Francois. How can seniors stay informed about sort of the trends or latest scams that are affecting them and their communities?
Well, I already mentioned AARP has our Fraud Watch Network program, and well, I guess to take a step back, there's a real issue with a lot of state agencies, a lot of federal agencies, local law enforcement, other nonprofit organizations all want to be the place where consumers go to get help with fraud. Often that doesn't mean getting their money back. It doesn't mean arresting the criminals, but the network just is and needs to do a better job of collaborating across sectors, whether that's the social work sector, financial industry, government, local, and state and federal. And there is structure for that. So in state governments, there's a multi-sector discipline approach, multidisciplinary approach to having those different functions work together and help people that need it and to prevent fraud in that way. But I'll say our call center, our website has the resources that help people find the right government agency to work with to stop the fraud from happening and make sure that data is reported well. You know, in 2024, we don't have the data about Utah yet, but it will be about $100 million reported stolen through these fraudulent schemes, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. It's much more than that because so few people report. So let's all just work together and do better with understanding these crimes and protecting people.
And I'll ditto everything that you said, but I'll also add that the division published a Utah Investor Guidebook a few years ago. You can get it in both hard copy form as well as digital, and it has a lot of good basic foundational principles on investing and then some red flags of how to protect yourself from investment fraud. We also have several hard copy resources as well as digital resources that specifically relate to senior scam prevention. And then if you do like social media, you can also follow us on Facebook or on Twitter, and then also check out our website. A lot of those resources are available as well.
This question is for Jay and, or excuse me, the glare here, just a moment. Katie and actually Francois and Coy, I'm gonna have you take this one. Let's talk about affinity fraud, because I've heard that Utah is the #1 state, which we like to be and we're proud of, but not in this circumstance for affinity fraud. How many of you have heard of affinity fraud? Can you guys break that down for us and tell us a little bit of what's involved, and maybe what are some tactics that any of us, much less our aging population, can use in cases like this?
Sure, I'll start if that's okay, Coy. So affinity fraud, and I know some of you raised your hand as to knowing what it is, but it's essentially when the scammer targets a readily identifiable group for their scam. So the group identity can be anywhere from religion to your profession to your hobby group to ethnicity. But the point is that the scammer will either be an actual member of that group or they're going to pretend to be a member of that group. And the whole purpose is for you to lower your guard so that they can betray your trust. Melanie, you mentioned this, and Katie also mentioned this about how nice everyone is in Utah. And I agree with that. I think that there's a community dynamic here that promotes that. So whether or not it's based on your religious affinity or just neighborly kindness, I think that a lot of folks sometimes are less willing to ask questions if a person that they're talking to they trust or they've known for a long time or they're a part of their group. But really what we would tell you is what we would tell any investor, regardless of whether or not you're related to a person or if you've known them for a while. If you're giving your hard-earned money to anyone, you should always ask the questions. It's not going to be offensive, and honestly, if they really care about you, they'd want you to ask the questions to make sure the investment is appropriate for you. One of the things that I usually tell folks, the state of Utah, we don't have something called a friends and family exemption to the registration of securities here. So even if mom or dad or grandma or grandpa are raising funds, they have to go through the same requirements as anyone who's raising funds in the state in order to solicit your funds. So the same information we would give to any investor. Ask the questions, make sure you're diligent in your responses, and then also seek out other information from a third party, not just from the person who's soliciting the funds.
Yeah, I think, Francois, you touched on it, is we are a trusting state. We're very trusting to those. We're open, we're friendly, and you know, I have colleagues back east that have no problem telling me no when I expected a yes, but
Feel a little ashamed right now.
no, don't feel ashamed. I'd be proud of it. But we are seeing that trusting nature. And just one example that we're seeing, and you're talking about the affinity fraud, is with the church. A quick story. We had a pastor of a church, and it was down in Colorado City, Hilldale area. Outside, I had to send it off to the Arizona Attorney General, but it was the pastor that was having these elderly folks come in when they couldn't live in the home. He had a piece of property, had some trailers, had them live there, and then had them sign their whole life savings over to the congregation. And so, and they had done that, and then when they had balked at it or had not wanted to do it, there's a lot of pressure tactics. So this happens a lot, and it's unfortunate. And affinity fraud can come from all different forms. We've seen it with family members again. I hate to knock on the family, because for the most part, families are good, and we have really good people. But you know, they see an opportunity of greed, and that's what it is. They will go after them. So unfortunately, my shop isn't allowed to do affinity fraud unless it has a Medicaid nexus. But we do have a special investigations unit, which I think we added onto the resource guide here, that they can do some reports and they will investigate those. So.
We're getting close on time, but I have two more questions. I'm just going to open it to any of our panel members. But how many of you, by show of hands, have heard of pig butchering schemes? I mean, it's super appealing title. Okay. Let's talk about it, because this is a very real thing and involves exploitation in a lot of ways, both to the victim and potentially the scammer is being exploited as well. So who wants to take that one?
So it's really a mix between online relationship scams and investment scams, and the criminals are investing what could be a lot of their own personal time into fattening up their victims by building that trusting relationship with them. It could start just with a simple text like I've received more than a few times in the last week that just asks me if I'm back to work after the holidays or if I still work at the Gucci store. That was one of them that I received. But it's just an opener to start a conversation, and it could sort of blossom into an online relationship. Then the victim is somehow finds out that the person they've been talking with is very wealthy by investing in online and often cryptocurrency or some other fake investment where they can transfer their money into a website. By the time they see their money grow and grow and grow in this fake website, when they try to take the money out, it's already been gone since the moment that they put it in that account. So I like to highlight that it's not always romance scams, because people tend to turn off their ears if they know they're not going to be romantically dating online. But more and more of our lives are built around forming relationships with the people that we meet online, and there are plenty of criminals lurking in those spaces.
I just want to add, this is not like there's just a few people randomly someplace. Margaret and I were recently at a conference where they showed us images of warehouses where individuals are being human trafficked into these warehouses. Their passports are being taken in foreign countries. They are sitting there with multiple devices, and their job, so to speak, is to just sit there and text all day long to see who they can get on the hook to bring this in. This is becoming a third world country business model, essentially, which is to get first world country victims on the hook and get that money transferred. So they are becoming incredibly sophisticated in their approaches. I got approached just the other day, a bank scam as well, never asked me for a single piece of information, and I saw a few flags, but I was getting nervous and the pressure was there, and I'm telling you, these guys are really good. And it's because this is all they are doing all day long, and it is a growing industry overseas. The more conversations we can have with our parents, with each other, about these types of tactics, the better, because they are getting very, very sophisticated in their approaches.
Okay, and this kind of relates in some ways to catfishing, but it could be pig butchering schemes. The epidemic of loneliness, how that plays into these scams. And again, just remind everybody what are some of the things they can do to prevent this happening and protect themselves.
I'll just share a brief anecdote that there's one very special holiday at our AARP call center where they receive more reports of fraud than any other day. And that would be Black Friday, because the family gets together at Thanksgiving and our call center's closed on Thanksgiving, so everyone wakes up the next morning and calls to get help with the scams that they discovered at that holiday.
I would just say, back to that relationship, we live in a different world today. When I was growing up, my grandparents were nearby, my parents had support. And I know as a Gen Xer, I don't want to give away my age here, I've got elderly parents who are isolated right now. I'm trying to raise kids at the same time. It's hard. I lost my mic. Was that? Nope. But I can project. We need to be better about message too, clearly, because you all are here because you care. But the more we can encourage people to have those conversations, scams and frauds, even though it's not fun. The other thing I'm working on with my mom right now is figuring out a code word. Phone calls, these types of things. I almost feel like when I used to have my kid have a safe word so that they knew if I sent someone to pick them up from school that was like me. I need that for my parents now so that they know that if the kids are calling them and asking them for money, that they know exactly like that this really is their child, my children, which they should not be calling their grandparents for money, let's be honest, but it happens. So I just want to make sure that like we're having those conversations because people are lonely, and when they're lonely, they start up these texts just innocuously like, hey, oh, sorry, wrong number. Oh, I hope you're having a good day. Yes, I'm having a good day. And then it just trickles. And so it's just so important that we're keeping our elderly population feeling connected to the rest of us and to their family.
Any last thoughts you want to leave with our guests today related to frauds and scams?
Okay. One of the last final thoughts is the importance of collaboration with everyone. Working together, we can make a difference. So, it takes a village to raise a child. It also takes more than that to raise your parents as they get older or an elderly population. And so, I'll take this moment, and since I have the attention of the other agencies, Adult Protective Services, we have a very close relationship with. They are my eyes and ears at many times, and they've got me on speed dial, which I really appreciate. And, the Victim Services, the Commission, we are very fortunate to have them, and by us working together, I think we can certainly make a difference in our communities in the future. So again, thank you.
And I'll just say really quickly, because Coy, you said exactly what I wanted to say. We have several partners throughout the state, both law enforcement partners as well as nonprofits, that will go out, will train, will educate on how to spot these things. A lot of the folks that we work with, they'll either say that this is a victimless crime because, maybe there's not drugs involved or someone hasn't been killed, but really it's not. Imagine your elderly mother or father who's 80 years old, all of their retirement has been stolen, and they don't have any recourse to get additional funds. We've had some really sad cases in a lot of our investigations that involve exactly that. Most folks don't know who the Division of Securities are and what we regulate, and also to come to us for the resources before you actually are defrauded. So now you know, hopefully, if you hadn't heard of us before. So send us the questions. Ask us, does this fall within your purview? And even if it doesn't, we'll reach out to one of our counterparts to figure out who it should go to. But again, I ditto everything that everyone said today, and thank you for having us. And these sort of forums are what we need to make sure that we're staying educated and that we're preventing fraud.
So quickly, we set some of these out on the table. This is a brochure that tells you a little bit about the Department of Commerce and our divisions, but there's two key things in here that if I can just convince you and you become my evangelists for this, verify a license. You can go to our tools and verify a professional license. You can see if someone's had disciplinary actions against them. This is just a very simple tool, but it's very powerful. Please consider doing that, whether you're hiring a contractor or you're looking at an investment advisor. Check their license. And then the other is several of our divisions take enforcement action, including Consumer Protection, Securities, Division of Professional Licensing, and our Division of Real Estate. And on the public utility side, our Division of Public Utilities helps channel complaints. File complaints. We can't help if we don't know what's happening. And as Katie said, the longer it takes to get that complaint, the the less likely we are able to make the consumer whole. But please share these. We set some on the end of the rows in the back of the room to pass down. I have plenty here to hand off if you would like to share with anybody in your networks, and I'm happy to get materials. And then lastly, just a reminder, this QR code has a number of the resources that our panel spoke about today. Please use that and reach out to us at the Department of Commerce and let us know how we can support some of your efforts. We love to come out and do presentations, and am happy to support that in any way this year. Thank you again.
I wonder if the batteries are...
That was a quick changeover. Look, we're on the home stretch here, so I'm going to ask everybody to literally do that. Stand up. Don't let that food settle. Get those arms up high. Kind of like romper room was, right? Bring it around. Okay. Get that blood going. Thank you. Can we just do a mic check real quick? Elaine?
Check, check.
You're good?
Check, check.
Good, good. Kyle? Oh, you're sharing. Okay, that's great. All right. Thank you, everybody. It's really a wonderful opportunity for us to be here today. My name is Rob Entz. I'm the Executive Director of the Utah Commission on Aging. And you've heard a variety of topics today, and there are so many things that can impact our aging journey. And so often they do overlap. They do interconnect. Rarely does one situation sit by itself. I'm deeply grateful to the Governor's Office for taking the time to put the symposium together and put a spotlight on some very core pieces of our aging experience and the issues that are associated with it. And we'll work very, very closely with the Governor's Office and the legislature to make sure that we're moving forward initiatives that will help improve the aging experience for older adults. Successful aging has been defined as an absence of disease and disability, high levels of physical and cognitive functioning, and engagement in interpersonal relationships and productive activities. That's the theme of what we're going to talk about right now. And a lot of these things have been touched on already. You've heard from some of the best and the brightest as they've expressed from their experience and their expertise what this aging journey looks like. But I preached for a long time that aging is not just about the challenges and the obstacles and the things that may slow us down a little bit or cause us concern, but it's about the opportunities. It's about the ability to take advantage of what the aging experience has to offer. Paul Leggett made a very, very interesting comment when he said, sometimes we see an environment or individuals in response to their future situation saying, I didn't sign up for this. This is not what I envisioned for me. Well, this is an opportunity for us to think through and really recalibrate our expectations and do something with what we know we can do and really make it a vibrant experience to the best of our ability. Our three panelists are Elaine Markland, who is not Tim Farrell that you saw in the program. Dr. Farrell came down with influenza A a couple of days ago and wisely decided he should probably step out of this one. But I really appreciate Elaine for stepping in. She is the new division chief for the Division of Geriatrics at the University of Utah and also the head of the Center on Aging at the University of Utah. She recently comes from us from Birmingham, Alabama, and we're so grateful to have her in the state and to have her share her expertise and her experience with us. Next, we have Emily Christensen. We've been partners and collaborators for a long time. She is a gerontologist and a music therapist, and somebody who has done some amazing things in engaging arts as part of the living experience in our lives. And finally, and not the least by any means, is Kyle Case. Had the opportunity of getting to know Kyle over the last few days, made the journey up from St. George. He is the CEO of the Huntsman World Senior Games. And as many of you know, that has been an extraordinarily successful organization for a number of years, involving thousands of participants, not only from Utah, but from literally around the world. So we're going to get to hear from them and their perspectives. While we want to put a real positive note at the end of this conference and bring everything together, I do want to ask our experts just really quickly to comment. What do they think are some of the contributing factors in our society, the trends in our society, that have lent to this idea of less connection and less engagement? I'm going to start with you, Emily.
One of the first things I thought about when Rob introduced this topic to me was we've talked just a little bit about ageism. I teach a weekly group and I facilitate an online weekly art class. And as I have grown older and learned more about ageism, I've really noticed internalized ageism. Once you start noticing in your head, you can't believe the messages you're telling yourself. And as I engage with the people who take the class, these ideas that they have about themselves and the beliefs they have about what they can do and what they can't do because they're older. And as they engage in these art classes and their shock and amazement of what they actually can do, they actually can draw, they actually can write poetry. And it just starts to rebuild who they thought they were or what they believed about themselves as this older person. So I feel like ageism can really impact in a negative way what we believe and limit the things that we'll try.
Kyle, your comments on that, please.
Thank you. Like everyone, I want to express my appreciation for the opportunity to be here. Thanks to Governor Cox. I think it's amazing that you've sat with us the entire day. I know your schedule is very busy. I know it's very full, and I think this is an indication of how important you and your administration take this important topic. So thank you again. I would agree with that. I would add that for me, what I have observed is that oftentimes it's fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of failure. And one of the things that I have noticed as we've engaged with athletes again from all around the world is that familiarity is the combatant to fear. And a lot of times it's just that very first step is the hardest one. And the second one is easier, and the third is easier. I've heard Governor Cox talk about his St. George Marathon experience. And I know that was true up until about the 22nd mile. And then it got very hard again. It got a lot harder. But I think if we can recognize that and recognize that if fear is the issue and take that very first step, that can help us in a lot of ways move beyond and solve so many of these problems that we're dealing with, I believe.
Thanks, Kyle. Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Rob, and thanks for having us today. I am just floored that this whole piece that we're here for today is even happening. It's just amazing. And coming from an outsider's point of view, I am really thrilled to be here and be a part of the change that may be coming. So I moved here specifically because I see the state and my new job as a place to innovate and educate. But one of the things that really keeps me up at night is trying to train the next generation to take care of our older adults. So I really worry and spend a lot of time thinking about how do we change that ageism framework in the healthcare setting, not only at the medical school, any kind of school level, nursing school, but all the way down to high school and lower, because we have a problem and we need to change that dynamic in terms of our whole perception on aging, our aging perception specifically in healthcare settings. I came into aging as a geriatrician because I won't tell you how long ago, but
Nursing home care was not what it should be. It's still not there. We have a long way to go. We can do better and we should do better. So I'm very passionate about this and I'm really glad and thanks to be here.
And thank you for stepping in at a crucial moment to help us out. We're looking forward to great things from you, by the way, at the university that will impact the rest of the state. So Elaine, talk a little bit about, realistically, the aging process. What are things that happen to us that cause us to reflect maybe we can't, shouldn't, push us away? A little bit just what is a realistic expectation as we go through this process?
Well, I think we've touched a lot on it throughout many talks today. And I think what Kyle said, fear is a driver, but physiologically, we know the body changes with age. We know there are certain things. And I'll use the framework of just what we're trying to do in the healthcare setting to recognize this is, cognition, mentation, mental health can really affect change in aging, mobility. It's a big cornerstone in multimorbidity. Multimorbidity comes with over-medication use. So there's so many facets of this, and nutrition is a huge piece of this as well. So all of this goes in to say that our body changes with aging, and we need to do a better job of trying to prevent it, keep people from being socially isolated, keep them in the community, engaged in the community, and also supported as well as their caregivers.
I'd like you to just add a couple of pieces on this. So one of the things that the University of Utah recently has been awarded a designation as an age-friendly university campus as well as an age-friendly healthcare system. And what does that mean, particularly on the spectrum of aging and especially older adults?
Well, it's one of the reasons why I moved here, because the whole system is on the forefront of aging care. And there is a huge national movement right now called age-friendly healthcare. And it's based in the 4M model, and some people even say 5 M's. So it's mentation, it's mobility. It's the cornerstone of this is what matters most. If we really are asking the right questions of the people we're caring for and trying to get them to meet their goals and their needs, that's a huge cornerstone of this. And the other one is just recognizing the impact of multimorbidity medications. And I would even add to the 4M's mental health. So there's so much to do in this space. And the designation, we are one of 11 sites across the country that's an age-friendly designated university campus. And so it goes across beyond healthcare. And so healthcare is where this started, but the movement is taking off to go well beyond that. Age-friendly communities, age-friendly states. I mean, it really is going in the right direction to do a better job putting a framework to making sure we recognize these things. And I take it very seriously that we must educate the workforce on this. So it is educating, it's recognizing, and it's trying to intervene. And so and Tim Farrell is really, I'm stepping in for him, but he has been on the forefront of this. He is a nationalized leader. There are videos on the website from our great state showing him taking care and putting these things into practice. So I'm just really proud to be here.
Thank you, Elaine. So one of the speakers who we heard from earlier today was Valerie Greer on one of the other panels, who has been instrumental in helping do the work around age-friendly ecosystems, which does touch upon our healthcare systems, our workplace, as well as our, not only the healthcare, but education and our communities, the way we build our communities out. And I just want to acknowledge that, and that she has been part of publishing a book on age-friendly ecosystems. I would encourage you to all look at it and review. It's got a lot of wonderful information tying this together. So Emily, you've had your own unique ecosystem of impact, and you definitely have worked with some very challenging circumstances. Talk a little bit about your work with individuals who feel compromised or diminished, and how you've been able to reach out and impact them.
So I'm a music therapist. I've been practicing for the past 15 years in hospice settings and in dementia care. And one of the things I was thinking about in regard to the aging, oh gosh, the way that we age and how we can work with it when we have dementia, when we're cognitively declined. So one of the things about music is that it is something that somebody with dementia can engage in. It remains a strength for them. And so when we're talking about how important it is for older adults to be engaged and how difficult that is when you're working with somebody with dementia where so many aspects of the ways that they can engage have been diminished, a strength that remains is music. And so that's how I've spent much of my time in the past 15 years, is using music as the medium to engage people who have dementia. It's very exciting right now because on a national level, the National Institutes of Health are recognizing that and putting a lot of money into research about how we can utilize music as a real tool when we're working with folks who have dementia. It's not just a pleasant thing, to sing a song, but it can really impact behavioral aspects of dementia when there's behavioral challenges and issues. When behaviors improve, it's easier to care for a person. It makes life easier for the caregiver. There's less need for medications which could cause falls. I mean, it's just this domino effect. So if there's something as basic as music that can affect all of that, it's thrilling to see that people at the very top levels are recognizing that and doing the research so that we can implement things like music therapy into healthcare as a legitimate, healthcare way to intervene in people's lives. A lot of people don't even know about music therapy, and let alone know that there's all this research about the legitimate ways that it affects people's functioning, in real ways.
So Emily, we mentioned earlier that you were involved with and in fact are the founder of the Utah Creative Arts Coalition. Talk a little bit about what your hope will come from that collaboration and kind of who's involved and what they are attempting to do.
Okay. Yeah, so we have a Utah Creative Aging Coalition, in case you haven't heard of it, which you probably haven't. The Utah Division of Arts and Museums, the past 3 years, they're going on the 4th year now, have really been focusing on creative aging. They've partnered with an organization called Lifetime Arts, which is a national creative aging organization that promotes creative aging being sort of woven into the way we live our lives. And so over the past 3 years, they have been training people. They've partnered with Lifetime Arts to come train people to teach best practices in creative aging. So as of right now, there are 167 people in the state of Utah that have been trained to facilitate these creative aging classes. So the momentum has been building with creative aging. People are very excited about it. People who facilitate the classes see the huge benefit that comes into people's lives when they are engaged in the arts. So we wanted to just continue this promotion and decided that we would hold a creative aging festival. September is Healthy Aging Month, so we decided to hold the festival in September during Healthy Aging Month. It's going to be a 2-week-long statewide festival. We'll have a kickoff at the Mid-Valley Performing Arts Center on August 30th. That'll be just a day full of classes, performances by older adults, art exhibits, celebrating the art of older adults. And in the 2 weeks following that, we'll have our partners throughout the state holding creative aging events. We hope to be able to reach, Utahns everywhere so that they will have a chance, if they haven't tried, engaging in the arts, that they'll try it. And just to promote that awareness of how good for our health engaging in the arts is.
Thank you, Emily. So Kyle, again, what a pleasant opportunity to meet you and become better acquainted with your work. Been aware of the Huntsman Games for years. Talk to us a little bit about what you've experienced in terms of how these games have engaged people and enriched lives.
Yeah, Rob, thank you very much. Many of you are familiar with the games specifically. I want to talk a little bit about that, but I want to broaden that and include the concept of senior athletes, because the benefits are available regardless of whether you compete in the Huntsman World Senior Games or you compete at your local Parks and Recreation League, whatever it is. But the Games, as many of you know, has been around for a long time here in the state. We were founded in 1987, so this year will be our 38th year of hosting the games. We do host athletes from all around the state, all around the nation, and literally all around the world. In fact, this year we hosted over 12,000 athletes that competed in 40 different sports, and 34 different nations were represented. We started with very humble beginnings. We've grown to be the largest annual Olympic-style multi-sport event in the entire world for athletes over the age of 50. And the great thing is that we get to host that right here in our great state every single year. We oftentimes are compared to the Olympics or the Senior Olympics. The Olympics in France hosted about 10,000 athletes. We hosted 12,000 athletes. We've all heard the announcement, and the torch was passed for Los Angeles. By the time Los Angeles gets to host the Olympics again, we will have hosted about 50,000 athletes. And again, they all get to be here in our great state. And I often share those numbers when I'm talking about economic impact, and the economic impact is significant, but the social impact is also very, very significant. If you think about those 12,000 in 1 year or 50,000 over a 4-year or 5-year time period, all of them are connected and have families, they have spouses, they have children, they have grandchildren. You start to see just how large this circle of senior athletes can affect their communities, their families, as well as themselves. So it's a wonderful thing. Is anybody here surprised to know that exercising is good for you? We all know that, right? We all know that. And sometimes the hard part is the motivation, because we all know it, but sometimes it's hard to do. So one of the ways that senior athletes have found to combat that is that we have found that competition is a real motivator. It's not the only one, but it's a real motivator. And so senior athletes, on average, 49% of senior athletes work out 6 to 7 times a week, intentionally work out 6 to 7 times a week, 49%. 96% of senior athletes intentionally work out at least 3 times a week. So there's a real motivator there, that competition aspect. Some of the other benefits to senior athletes, across the board, senior athletes have less cardiovascular disease and cardiovascular problems. They have significantly less occurrence of diabetes. In fact, 74% of senior athletes are less likely to have diabetes, especially if they're engaging in a cardiovascular event like running, basketball, those types of things. They're 74% less likely to have diabetes. Falling, as we all know, is a significant issue as we age. 1 in 5 Americans will experience a fall annually. 1 in 5. So there's 5 or 6 of us around each one of our tables. You can look around and see how significant that can be for an aging population. For senior athletes, 1 in 10 experience a fall. So a significant increase or benefit there. And I wonder if some of those self-reported falls were diving for a pancake to get the ball in a volleyball game, or sliding into second base in a softball game. But significant impact there. We also know that senior athletes experience less depression, anxiety, and stress. That is well researched. And as we talked a lot today about social isolation and loneliness, it is very difficult to be lonely and socially isolated when you're on a softball team and you're practicing twice a week and you're getting ready for your weekend tournament, or you have a pickleball partner that you plan to play with every other day in the morning, and you're going to a tournament on the weekend as well. So some real significant benefits to athletes across the board. And I know that some of you are thinking, hey, I'm 50. On March 1st, I'm going to go to seniorgames.net and sign up for the Huntsman World Senior Games and get some of these benefits in my life, right? And to you, I say, please come and be a part of the games. But some of you are also thinking, well, that's great for the athletes. I'm not really an athlete. Let me just say that all of us have the potential to be an athlete. I could tell you any number of stories of individuals who picked up sports later on in life. very quickly, my mother was one of them. When I got this job, I immediately started working on my mom to do something. It didn't matter what it was, but do something. And it took several years. I think it was Paul mentioned he had a hard time getting his mother-in-law to go out to the senior center. It took me a while to get my mom convinced and engaged, but she eventually decided she would do a 5K. Worst case scenario, she could walk if she had to, right? She came to her very first race, and let me also just acknowledge this was her very first ever athletic competition. She did not have the opportunity to compete as a young. She grew up in Nephi. She went to Juab High School, and as she said, the boys played sports and the girls were cheerleaders, and my mom was kind of an academic nerd, and so she didn't even get to be a cheerleader. She had never had the opportunity to compete. So you talk about a non-athlete, my mom would definitely fit within that category. She came to her first race, the pistol was fired and everybody took off, and she came back at the end of the race, and I was so proud of her, just so proud that she had overcome that fear, that anxiety. She took that very first step. I asked her how she felt, how did it go? She said, you know, I got out there in the middle of the race course and I was going along and I got stuck behind this guy. He was an older gentleman, probably 85 or so, and I didn't want to go around him because I thought that would be rude. And so I just kept plugging along behind him. I said, Mom, it's a race. You're supposed to pass people. That's the whole point. And she said, I know. And she actually has gone on to train and to not only train, but to also win medals. She's a multi-time gold medalist at the Huntsman World Senior Games, and it all just started with overcoming that fear and taking that first step. And she's been able to experience the health as well as the emotional and the social benefits that are available to senior athletes across the board. And maybe for you, it's not getting in your car and driving down to St. George and competing in our event. But somewhere in your community, I know that there is something that is available, whether it's with your local Parks and Rec department, maybe it's your community center, maybe it's your senior center, but there's somewhere that's available to you and those that you love that can take advantage of some of these competition-driven benefits that come from being a senior athlete. That's a long answer, but I hope
No, it's a wonderful answer. And I have to say, look, my father, well into his 80s, would go down and bowl and play horseshoes. He's very proud, was very proud, not with us anymore, that of the ribbons and things that he won. Now, you put your money where your mouth is. Look, I was reminded today by Rob Allen that I'm already at life expectancy, so I don't want to push my luck. But you, sir, have engaged in your own business down there. Talk about a couple of the events you participated in.
Well, thank you. I did turn 50 this last year. I just barely turned 51. So the year that I turned eligible, I knew that I was going to compete. In fact, I'd been looking forward to it for a very long time. I started relatively young with the games, and I had some amazing examples that led the way for me, not the least of which was my mom. So I knew that no matter what, this year I was going to compete with my mom. And we did sign up and register for the 5K. We ran together at one of the most special moments of my career at the Huntsman World Senior Games. But I also knew that I had a little bit of an inside track on what was available at the games. So this year we added climbing for the very first time as a competition at the games. And I'm not really a climber. It's something that I'm interested in, but I'm not really a climber. But I knew I couldn't let the inaugural year go by without competing in rock climbing. And so I did that as well. And then my wife, who also knew that when she turned 50, she had to compete. She chose the rowing event. And so also did a little bit of rowing as well. The main thing that I learned is that I probably don't have time to do 3 sports when the games are going on. So I'll have to adjust that for this coming year. But it is something that I have very much looked forward to and very much enjoyed finally being a senior athlete myself.
It's all about expectations, right?
Managed expectations, absolutely.
I have a hard enough time keeping up with my wife, who I might point out looks younger but is actually older. And she dreads what it takes to get me out to just hike and walk with her, even after she broke her back cross-country skiing. I always keep thinking, just take longer to heal so I can rest up, right? but she actually is back out and doing her thing and dragging me along. So I'm grateful for that locally at home. So referring back to my wife, we have lots of conversations about where we are at this stage of life. And honestly, I wouldn't go backwards. I don't want to. I have no desire to. I'm thrilled that we are at the stage of life where we can experience things that whether we dreamed about them or not, we're able to control our destiny. So much of what we do when we were younger really either enables or puts barriers in what we're able to do later in life. And that's been a theme throughout the conversations today. Elaine, when you work with individuals and patients that are struggling to just adapt to this new aging experience, what advice do you give them of how to re-engage and sort of, meet a reasonable expectation as opposed to just shutting it off and going into a dark place?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it is something we see. I mean, I think number one, the step is to educate our workforce to recognize this. So I think this goes under-recognized greatly across all of healthcare. And so recognizing it and stating that there is maybe perhaps social isolation. I think it's doing a better job of screening for social determinants of health, to look and see what things in their lifetime could have impacted where they are now, and learning, again, those 4 M's, what matters most? What are they looking forward to? That gives you a lot of insight into their own personal dynamics and what they want. What are they moving towards? What are their goals? What are their top priorities in life? And then it's kind of taking that into account and trying to build bridges. And so I think for me, learning about all these wonderful programs in the state of Utah and even locally, it's connecting people with other people and services. It's recognizing the caregiver needs as well. And it's just having a good sense of community. I think, again, people sometimes want to stay where they are. They don't like to change. Change is hard. I come from a place of trying to do behavioral change work, and it is extremely difficult. But, just planting a seed sometimes can make a big difference in someone's life. And I never say how little or how much. It's just showing you care, trying to meet them where they are, and planting some seeds sometimes, and staying in touch over time. So I have no pretenses that you can make massive changes sometimes in people, but it just takes a caring attitude and a knowledge base to recognize and ask the right questions.
Thanks, Elaine. So kind of our last few comments here. I think that we have witnessed in the past few years a variety of things in our society that have contributed to potential retrenchment and isolation, whether it's a pandemic or, as we are now currently witnessing, the tragedy of fires in California. And to see people who step outside themselves, who may have lost everything, lend a hand to help someone else, it's an extraordinary height of volunteerism. Volunteerism is a wonderful way that we engage in giving service to others. Emily, talk just a little bit about, in your experience, where volunteer opportunities you see have made a difference and how they can make a difference in people's lives.
Well, the thing that some of you may know, Sunny Udell. She worked for Salt Lake County Aging, and she is since retired. I facilitate a choir for people who have dementia and their caregivers. And Sunny, and I work for Jewish Family Service as their Arts and Aging Coordinator. Sunny volunteers for us, and she brings refreshments for choir every week, which is really important because we sing for an hour, and then we sit in a big circle and eat refreshments, and we talk for an hour. Everybody, the playing field is leveled. We're all talking, we're all visiting. Caregivers are not worried or stressed about what their person might do because we all understand. And so this act of volunteerism from Sunny, it's huge for me because it's really hard for me to conduct the choir and bring all the snacks. So it helps me a lot, but it's given her such a sense of purpose, and she has thanked me profusely for seeing her because she feels invisible in this world. And she was recently honored at the Hearts and Hands Awards. I think that's what that was called, that happened recently. for her volunteerism. So it's made a world of difference for us, for me personally, for the members of the choir to have that opportunity to sit and eat and chat, and then just for her personally to be a part of the choir, to be truly valued, and to be honored and to be seen for the gifts that she still has so many of to give.
Thank you. Kyle, I bet volunteerism plays a huge role in your ability to conduct those games.
There's no question about that. We have a staff of 7 full-time people, and then we have 7 seasonal part-time that come in and help as we get closer to the games and help with registration and things like that. We have about 3,000 volunteers that help accomplish all the rest of what needs to be done during our very specific 2-week time period. And there's no question that we couldn't do what we do without that army of volunteers. And I'm also convinced that there's no question that it couldn't be done in the same way as it is done here in this great state. We have volunteers that have been with us for decades, that have done a variety of different tasks over the years. We have people who are brand new to the event that come and help for their very first time, and collectively, together, it's the way that that really anything is accomplished. I would also just emphasize the importance of the health benefits, social, emotional, mental, and physical that come with volunteering as well. Many of the statistics that I just shared about being a senior athlete are mirrored through volunteerism. And many of us have experienced that in our own lives, both as recipients as well as those who have reached outside of ourselves to help. So it's such a huge thing, and again, so many benefits. In some ways, it almost can feel a little self-serving by being a volunteer, but that's how so much is done, and the way that things get done here in this great state, certainly.
And I think you've heard, thank you, Kyle, I think you've heard today many opportunities for intergenerational engagement as well. We talked a little bit earlier about the importance of financial literacy, and that applies to health literacy and legal literacy, as well as technical literacy. Just all kinds of opportunities to engage individuals, older adults with younger adults, even high school age, and vice versa, that will enrich the generations as they experience growing old together. We thank you for your time today. I just want to highlight one thing, and again, an appreciation for being here. The Commission on Aging was charged a couple of years ago to add to their statute a requirement to have a master plan for aging for the state, which we've been working on for a couple of years. The most recent edition, it was just put on our website yesterday, utahaging.org. Would encourage all of you to become familiar with that. It's work that many, in fact, most of you have contributed to how we've zeroed in on the priorities. And it's gratifying to say that the governor's selected priorities for this year's symposium and his initiatives harmonize beautifully and allow us the opportunity to support him and his agenda as well. And we openly encourage input and advice along the way to make sure that we stay on track. It's a wonderful Browning quote that my wife and I have hanging in one of our rooms. I won't give you the whole one, but it basically says, "Grow old along with me, the best is yet to be. For the last of life was what the first was made." And we think about that. We often tend to think that our best times are behind us. Well, in fact, we live the first half of our adulthood preparing for the opportunities and the richness of what comes later. May we all embrace that. And again, appreciate your time. And just one caveat, I'll have no falls leaving this conference. Not on our watch. Anyway, thank you, panel. Appreciate your time. I'll turn the time over to Lieutenant Governor Henderson. Thank you.
Wow. What an incredible day this has been. I told the governor yesterday, I realized last week that I had a really good week. Last week was a great week, and I don't remember any other weeks in the last 4 years that were great weeks. I've had good days, not a lot of great weeks. But this is turning out to be another great a great week and a great day. I've learned so much. I want to thank my friends at MAG for the button. Aging, so cool. Everyone's doing it. It's true, whether we like it or not. We don't like the alternative. My husband, Gabe, isn't here today because he's working. He's seeing patients. My husband, Gabe, is a physical therapist who does home health. Lots of hips and knees, lots of older folks. My husband, Gabe, played baseball at BYU. He wanted to do sports therapy. He went to physical therapy school, telling me he was not interested in geriatric care. But his first job out of college, out of physical therapy school, was at Utah Valley University, seeing hips and knees, a lot of older folks. And he realized something. He loves older folks. He has a gift for interacting with them because he loves to hear their stories, and they love to tell their stories. And over the years, a lot of 90-year-old ladies have fallen in love with my husband. We've been invited to birthday parties. We've become part of families. My husband will walk in to someone's home that he doesn't know and see a patient who needs care. And 45 minutes later, leave knowing a NASA scientist, someone who was a war hero, someone who spent their life in the service of others. He has learned so much from the people that he sees on a daily basis that he can't extract himself from that patient care aspect of his business because he loves them. And so he misses a lot of stuff like this with me because he is doing what he does best. And I asked him what he learned from people that he sees. And he, first of all, he knows that people want to be heard. People want to be seen as humans. When people get old, oftentimes what they did, the incredible accomplishments of their past have been forgotten or overlooked. And they have a hard time feeling that sense of self-worth that they once felt. And he loves to bring that out in people. But he did say to me, so many people in the aging generation understand loving their neighbor and helping each other out in times of need, something that he feels is being lost today. I'm not an athlete, where's Kyle? But I am 50. I turned 50 last September. A couple of years ago, Arthur Brooks sent me a book, From Strength to Strength, Finding Success, Happiness, and a Deep Sense of Purpose in the Second Half of Life. And I was really offended when I got that in the mail. But it's a great book. It's a great book. And he talks about the first half of life, our strengths are different than the strengths we have in the second half of life. And that's okay. And it should be embraced, and it should be celebrated, and it should be expanded. And he talks about Cicero. Cicero has 3 points for old age. Time in old age should be spent in service, not necessarily in play. That's Cicero. I think we should play too, but service. Their greatest gift is wisdom. Wisdom is something that only comes with age and experience. And their natural ability is counseling, mentoring, and advising. We have to do a better job of seeing our older population for the humans, the contributors that they are now, not just what they once were, but what they are now. There is so much that we can benefit from our older populations, and there are so many ways that we've heard today that we can engage. Cross-generational. We have service initiatives that the governor and I are working on for high school, for college-age students, making sure that people have proximity. How do we get more people interested in aging healthcare? Proximity. My husband didn't want to treat old people until he started treating old people and found out that he loved it. It's proximity. It's opportunity. And when we talk about connection and loneliness being a cause of death and hardship for older people, I just have to give one quick example of something that I learned recently. It was in a podcast, and I can't remember the name of the podcast, but there's also a book, and the book is called Heat Wave. And this book, it's about the great Chicago heat wave in 1995. Hundreds of people died in a matter of a few days because of this heat wave. And there was a lot of finger pointing, a lot of people trying to perform, look back and try to see why so many people died, what the problem was. But then a sociologist took a look underneath the surface to find out what really happened. Why did some people survive the heat wave while other people didn't? And he compared two adjacent neighborhoods in Chicago, North Lawndale and South Lawndale. Now on paper, both of those neighborhoods are very, very similar. They both have a lot of aging adults, older adults who lived alone. They were both poor neighborhoods. They're both ethnically very similar. But the people in North Lawndale, 10 times more people in North Lawndale died in that heat wave than in South Lawndale. And the sociologist kind of dug in and interviewed people and looked at what why that was. They were both poor communities. The difference he found was that in North Lawndale, that urban center had been depopulated. People had moved out. Gangs had moved in. There was a high crime rate. The people who lived there often were afraid to go outside. They were afraid to open their doors. They were afraid to walk down the street. But the people in the adjacent neighborhood of North Lawndale it was kind of overpopulated. There were a lot of people there. There were a lot of neighbors. There were stores. The stores that had moved out of North Lawndale, they were there in South. And there were community places, and there were neighbors checking on each other. And just the fact that there were neighbors checking on people made all the difference. Community. There's a lot of stuff that government can do and should do better and more of. But there are some things we can't do. And that's where everybody else comes in. And it's from the ground up. We have to strengthen our communities. We have to see value in humans, in individuals. We have to see the humanity in our older populations. And we have to build communities where people love each other and care for each other and notice each other. And I know that we're not going to do this by ourselves, but I have great faith in the people of Utah, and especially the people in this room, to go out and help us build a better community in our state, a sense of community that will save lives. Thank you all so much.